Welcome, everybody, to the Boulder City Council study session of June 11th, 2019. We have one topic, and we have a joint session with Open Space Board of Trustees, which is a treat. And with that, we'll hand it over to, who am I handing it to?
Dan. Go ahead.
Oh, you would like me to do it? Okay.
Open Space Interim Director.
Here we are.
I will say a minute or two of opening remarks, and I'll turn it over to Darren and team to move us into the depths of tonight's study session. But I just thought I would start off by just recognizing the fact that for over 100 years, the city of Boulder has been on the cutting edge of community land preservation efforts. It's got a reputation that not only spans the Front Range and the state, but nationwide. I, of course, was keeping tabs on this for many years in the hinterlands of Northeast Wisconsin for many years. And together, we have built an iconic world-class open space system that truly rivals in scenic significance and ecological integrity many of our national parks, and is actually visited and enjoyed by more people than many of these same parks. This beloved land system has been built and sustained and cared for over the decades through a robust partnership over the years of city council members, Open Space Board of Trustees, department staff, our agency partners, our nonprofit community, as well as, of course, many community members. And that the deep engagement we've had with the community is sort of the hallmark of our open space system in many ways, other than the land itself. And over the past 18 months or so, OSMP has brought this same level of partnership and this same level of collaborative spirit to bear in the development of our department's first master plan. And so we are gathered here tonight, actually, to discuss how well we have incorporated the engagement we have received to date. As you recall, it was just about a year ago or so that we all sat in the same room with board and council and department staff, in which we incorporated the engagement that we received in the first phase of our master planning process in the development of our 5 major management themes, or what we have now called our focus areas, that will help the department zero in on what we ought to focus on over the next 10 years. So tonight, what we're charged to do is we would like as staff to get your feedback on how well we have incorporated community engagement that we received since last summer in identifying the specific strategies we need to execute in order to carry out and fulfill those 5 focus areas. As well, we would like your feedback on how well we have sorted out what our high priorities ought to be in the near term. So we really look forward from a staff perspective to having this discussion tonight, to getting your constructive feedback, and we'll go back and do some refinements and come back to you with an even better plan the next time we do meet up. So as we head into the home stretch with the hopes that the council will be considering a final draft plan in early September, I almost said December, that would be a mistake. I just want to acknowledge the amount of effort that has gone into this robust public engagement process. It is truly one of the most engaged and impressive efforts that I have personally been involved in my 28-year land and water conservation career. So I just want to congratulate all of us for the amount of community engagement that we've done so far, and we look forward to a few more months of that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to OSMP's Master Plan Project Manager and Senior Planner, Darren Wagner, to take us from here.
Thanks, Dan. So definitely want to thank everybody again for being here tonight. And I know that it'll be a few hours of really productive conversation. So it really is a treat, as Dan said, to have us all together. So really do appreciate that. I also just wanted to reiterate some of what Dan talked about and just remind us a little bit about the community engagement process that we've undertaken for the last 18 months. And if you think all the way back to when the project management plan was accepted by City Council, I think we were all envisioning at that time when we were working with the process committee on designing the engagement process, I think we were envisioning tonight. Because I think this is the opportunity to let that community engagement process play out and speak for itself, and to test whether or not that worked and whether we've incorporated the engagement well enough. And while we had more than 10,000 public comments. We also held 7 events, which attracted 900 people. We engaged with more than 1,400 people in underserved communities, which in our cases meant often youth, the Latino community, those experiencing disabilities. It's more than numbers. And it really has been a meaningful process where we've asked complex, difficult questions of our community members. We've engaged our staff the entire process before, during, and after every one of our engagement windows to leverage their expertise, and really brought to bear as much information as we could in the process so that we could inform discussion and bring us to the point we are today. And I think what the results are, hopefully, are speaking for themselves, but I know I can speak for staff in saying that it has felt like a profound process, because it's felt like there were opportunities and moments where the community was really coming together, and we were identifying shared values that we all have as it relates to responsible recreation, nature preservation, working landscapes. I think we all were able to see a common language emerge, and we're just thrilled to have been able to start the process that way and hopefully continue it as we close out the process. So I'm going to give it just a brief introduction here and just remind us, zooming back out, what those engagement windows have looked like, because what they start to indicate is the general outline for the draft plan. And I want to point out that there are copies. I know some of you requested hard copies, and so those are, if you did, they're sitting in front of you. Otherwise, there are copies sitting in between some of you if you want to refer to them throughout the night. But again, we started with this process around values and asked questions about our hopes and concerns for the future of open space, and led into the approval of the focus areas. And that was something that came through Board and Council last summer. And move through the development of outcomes, which in our case is a set of aspirations, those things that we hope to achieve to help us advance each of these focus areas, as well as then the strategies that would help us achieve those outcomes. Our most recent engagement window was the prioritization of those strategies, and then we're tomorrow closing out our 5th engagement window, which has been an opportunity to release the draft plan to the community and start to ask those same questions we'll explore tonight. In other words, how well did we incorporate engagement? How well did we do in developing the draft plan? And what I'd like to do is bring some of the findings to light and highlight a couple of these engagement windows by way of getting us accommodated or acclimated to what's in the draft plan. I know it's a lot to get through, and some of us have been spending more time with it than others. So by way of highlighting our 2nd engagement window, just to remind us where the focus areas are, our first focus area that council approved was ecosystem health and resilience. And as we think about what that is, what that really means to us, we can highlight a couple of, one community quote in particular that emerged in the engagement window, which this community member said, "It's a very unique ecosystem with some of the greatest diversity on our continent. I can go 1,000 miles east or west and not find that diversity of plant and animal life." And so we heard so many comments like that through the process, and that led as well with data and information to the development of this focus area. And the value statement in and of itself really speaks to what it's about. When we think about using the best available science, we protect healthy ecosystems and mend those we have impaired. And so in a lot of ways, that sums up so much of what we are and who we are as a community and who we are as staff. We also know that when we asked most recently our community in terms of how important this focus area was, 94% of our respondents said that this focus area was either absolutely essential or very important to the future of OSMP. And so again, that felt like real confirmation of the engagement process that we had done. The next that we'll talk about tonight is agriculture today and tomorrow. And the value statement for this is our legacy and our future are based on working landscapes that are in harmony with nature. Sometimes that's kind of all you need to say, because you kind of feel it, you hear it, and there's a lot to that statement. In the case of asking our community members how important that particular focus area is for the future of OSMP, 49% said it was either absolutely essential or very important. Responsible recreation, stewardship, and enjoyment is the third. The value statement there is also really compelling. We are united by our connection to and our enjoyment of nature and our obligation to protect it. And so again, that pulls together a lot of conversations around what nature means to us and what it means to steward it together. And in the case of our community members, how important this one is to the future of OSMP, 90% said it was either absolutely essential or very important to the future of OSMP. Community connection, education, and inclusion. This was one where we also got a lot of great help from City Council and Board a year ago when we were looking at the approval of this, where we wanted to make sure that education, for example, was central in the development of this focus area. And the value statement for this is, together, we build an inclusive community of stewards and seek to find our place in open space. So we're really trying to pull these community voices through as we continue and start to wrap up our process. And 62% of respondents to our recent survey said that this focus area was either absolutely essential or very important to the future of OSMP. So there are a lot of interrelationships between the focus areas. We set up arguably a set of silos so that we could have individual conversations that were very important to have, all the while knowing that there are a lot of interrelationships between and among all of them. And really at the center of some of this is our fifth focus area, which is financial sustainability, because in a lot of ways that focus area talks about the how we will implement and go about supporting implementation of the other four focus areas, how we'll achieve those outcomes and strategies. And this is where we talk about things like acquisition, planning for an uncertain future as it relates to our budget situation, updating our planning framework, and our acquisitions approach. All of those things are elements that, again, help us achieve the other focus areas. And 71% of our respondents to the recent survey said that this was either absolutely essential or very important to our future. And so by way of highlighting another, our current engagement window is the one that we're in, again, that wraps up tomorrow night. And what we've heard so far is quite honestly gratitude. We've gotten open comments that have said, thank you for this process. We have appreciated the opportunity to participate in it. And certainly we've also gotten suggestions that in a lot of ways align with the feedback that we've gotten to date. Some of those are an effort or a suggestion to integrate strategies across focus areas and to think about the ways that when we get into implementation, there are synergies or relationships between those. Others talk about advancing certain strategies further. And we'll talk about some of that tonight and hopefully get guidance from Board and Council about where we need to do that and where some of those might sit better in implementation level planning and programs and projects. We also got comments around either narrowing or refining priorities. So we got some comments, for example, that we have too many priorities. We will talk later tonight about that we have 17 out of 46 of our strategies initially prioritized with input from the staff community and the board. And some said, narrow that even further and think about the things that you can really achieve in the near term. While others were saying that we should explore potential refinements to those. So for example, placing more emphasis on tribal relations or more emphasis on soil health or supporting farmers and ranchers. So there were comments there sort of to tweak the content of the plan, but really all of the comments we felt like in total were supportive of where we've come and where we are to date. And as we think about going forward, we have set out at the beginning of this process with the intention of hopefully having council support our final plan in September. So starting and finishing the plan within one council term. And so with tonight's study session, we'll kick off a really important conversation with both board and council. And then we do have a hold for tomorrow night for our board to continue any of the conversations that we can't wrap up tonight, similar to what we did last summer. But we'll need a head nod of support from council to make sure that we're comfortable with the topics that the board would explore tomorrow night. We then have a meeting on June 26th with our process committee, and I want to take a moment, as I often do, to just thank Aaron, Mary, Tom, and Kurt, because that's a lot of extra time that you've spent trying to guide this process, and it's really been so fruitful, and we so appreciate the guidance that we've gotten to date. And we've set up that meeting as an opportunity to use it as a checkpoint on our schedule. We recognize that tonight and tomorrow night, something may emerge where there might be potential impacts to our schedule that would affect our ability to come to council with the final plan in September. So in order to meet some of those, if that comes up, we'll connect with the process committee in a couple of weeks and decide what our options are and what the best approach is to meeting those needs. And then our goal from there is to release the next draft of the plan for review by OSBT and the planning board, and that would come out in mid-July. And then again, moving towards the hopeful support by council on September 3rd. And it's after that, once we have final approval from council, that we would make the plan pretty, that we would lay it out in a graphic format with more charts, more graphs, more graphics to help tell the story and bring it alive. And we've used that approach we've designed that approach with guidance from the process committee, because there was interest in getting feedback on the content, similar to how the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan has rolled their process out, before we worked on laying out the graphic document. And then that's also when we start working through the implementation aspects of this. So when we start putting together the real work plans of the plans, programs, and projects that need to come out of this for staff to start implementing. And then in next year, as part of our normal process, with consultation with the board and then council around our budget approval, those are opportunities then to further engage again with board and council around the implementation plan, and to further flesh out any of the details around that bear conversation.
So thank you, Darren. If we have additional comments after tonight, can we send them to you? And you could just send them as they are to the trustees? Because I didn't envision tonight going deep into weeds, but to have kind of a higher level discussion. But I do have some specifics, and I didn't want to go into them tonight, so.
Our hope is tonight that we have a conversation about the content, that the things that we need dialogue around with board and council, that we address those tonight. If there are things around particular phrasing or tweaks or editorial or those sort of things, then we would welcome comments if you could submit them by June 16th. And
Lots of time, thanks.
And we'll make sure you have the email address for
You
that.
shouldn't have told me that, because I would have gotten you something tomorrow.
Oh,
but
well, that's the
I'm
deadline.
a good procrastinator.
But that's a good example of, we really are tonight looking for things that are that high level, as you mentioned, that need discussion.
Yep.
And then things that are the word changes or some minor things,
Well, yeah,
that can be later.
yeah, and there's just, I could give you a call. There's just some things that I think could use a little editing or, you know.
Okay.
But otherwise, it's great.
So again, just to reiterate the focus of tonight, I know there are a lot of elements to the plan, we've talked about them, but the focus tonight is we're hoping to hear your feedback on the strategies themselves and how we've prioritized those strategies. And again, the detailed plans, programs, and projects that would help us implement those strategies, that is for the 2020 process that I just described in terms of budget approval and implementation planning as we consult with the board and then council on that. And Anna is going to help us keep on track. But before we get into that, I just want to give you some highlight to just give you an understanding, get you more grounded in what we really mean. So by way of example, we have two strategies that we've just pulled out. So the first is our very first strategy under ecosystem health and resilience: conserve and restore Boulder's natural heritage. So you will see a short phrase like this in the front of every strategy, and you have handouts in front of you that replicate those phrases. There's also a poster up here that we'll be referring to, as well as some slides. So you'll see these short phrases, and that's a way of summarizing the strategy. But behind each of those strategies is also a more descriptive sentence about what it's all about. So this is the purview. These are the places where we're hoping for dialogue tonight. How we describe those short phrases, what those sentences, what the content behind them is. If we have substantive changes, let's talk about those tonight. Knowing, again, that afterwards we get more details as we put together the implementation plan. So by way of example, for this particular strategy, this would guide work around creek restoration, for example. So work around Boulder Creek, where we're looking at restoring gravel pits and looking at restoring the natural flow of the creek to support better habitat and water quality. Another example is under agriculture today and tomorrow. So you'll start to see these little handles, or ATT is our acronym. We're bureaucrats, so we speak in acronyms, forgive us. This one is around enhanced soil health and resilience, and the longer sentence around this is talking about managing agricultural activities in tilled lands and native grasslands to prevent soil erosion, maintain and improve soil health, sequester carbon, and protect ecosystem function. So again, this is sort of the purview for conversation, knowing that in implementation, we would get more detailed and talk about what that really is. So in this particular example, that would involve programs around cover cropping and crop rotation, and continuing our soil health monitoring program so that we understand what the future looks like as it relates to potential for carbon sequestration and other work.
Okay. As Darren mentioned, my name is Anna Laybourne. I'm with Design Workshop, the consultants behind this work. And I was mentioning to Darren that this, when it was brought up that, this isn't as many comments on a draft plan as what we expected. We had so many comments earlier on. I said, that's exactly what you want. That's the goal. You want this sort of arc of building interest in the plan from folks, people really engaged, providing input, showing up to learn more about the plan, and then as the draft is released, people saying, I feel heard, I support what's going on, and so you receive fewer comments. That's ideal. So that's kind of what we're looking at tonight with having ended that period of having public comments on the draft plan, and now tonight getting to engage in a discussion with you around, have we really heard it right? And are there any tweaks and adjustments that will make it a plan that you are supporting going forward? So tonight, staff is seeking guidance from City Council and OSBT on affirming and refining the strategies, as Darren just explained what those are in here, and the priorities for the draft master plan. We've had limited touch points at this time with council, so tonight I might call on council a little bit more to speak to the items in this plan, but we want that discussion and that engagement tonight. So this is really your chance to have it all together in one room. I'm going to orientate you to a couple of things that you have with you to work with in this discussion. One is some of you asked for maps to be provided so you can refer to the lands. And if you look at between all of you, there's a system overview document that you're sharing. It looks the big one with a pink tab in it. The pink tab is indicating where the map is. So that might help you in finding your way. Secondly, I have some other helpers here. Juliet is going to be taking detailed notes the whole time. So she's in the back doing that. Know that we're getting all your comments and noting those for the meeting tomorrow night as well as for the future. And in addition, Darren is going to be shifting over to help take some notes over on these pads over here. The reason for that is she wants to make note of any agreements about substantive changes that she hears and make note of those up here so you can refer to them. And secondly, if there are any further resolution notes that she needs to track for future conversations, she'll make it up there. And also kind of indicating where we're at in the agenda. So that's the help I'll have with some of these things to move through it tonight. So overall, we have until 9 o'clock tonight to go over these items. And we're going to be discussing which strategies are on target in the draft master plan. That's the key one for this evening, and which need refinement. We'll also be looking at priorities and what support you might need going forward for this plan and reviewing some of the items. So with that, I'll give a little bit of overview of how we're going to spend our time, because we were fortunate that nearly all of you, 11 out of 13 of you, responded to a question about how do you want to spend your time this evening. So that's really helpful for us. We know from that you particularly want to spend your time talking about ecosystem health and resilience, as well as responsible recreation, stewardship, and enjoyment. We're kind of the ones that had the most interest in discussion. So that's how we're allocating our time and why we've thought this type of timing for each of those topics might be appropriate. We'll kind of move through it and see how it goes. But with that, we want to make sure there's as much conversation tonight around these topics as a group, rather than having to have you later provide emails that you wish you had discussed it together. So that's the goal of this night, and I'll do a time check partway through to see how we're doing on reaching that goal. Okay, so with that, our path forward.
Can I ask a process question? Oh,
Yes, go ahead, Jill.
you're not on, Mike.
Mike,
Then I noticed on our timeline there,
Yes.
that we said at the process committee, and I realized that we didn't include any time for just like overarching comments.
That's at the end.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's, okay.
So we didn't put time to it, but we're going to see how much time we have at the end and how we're doing. But we thought we'd have some final thoughts kind of be able to collect after we talk about priorities. We can do it then. Good point there. We didn't put time to it. You're correct. I'm sorry.
My question was just about prioritizing the priorities. Is that the last thing we're doing?
Yes, we have 45 minutes for that part of it. So we'll go through each of the strategies that you wanted to discuss first, and then we'll come back and talk about prioritization.
So this financial sustainability, which is one of the 5, is going to be discussed. And I don't know when is the right time, but I asked Aaron, and I do have a question about how it's presented, the goals, and then the strategies to achieve the goals. And they don't just match up one for one, but it takes some time to work that out. And so I was wondering if staff or if you guys had thought about how it's laid out, because you see all of these outcomes or goals that you want, and it's like, okay, and some of the comments we've gotten have been, okay, these lack specificity. And I just wonder if on the layout, if it might be more helpful for people to have kind of strategies next to them. It's more a layout thing, and so that's what I wanted to talk with you.
So along those lines, in reading through the draft, what I realized was that as you look at these, and I had like arrows going from one to the other, how they relate to each other, and perhaps in the next version it could be helpful to have Venn diagrams like you had at the beginning of your presentation, to have Venn diagrams of all of those that are directly, they touch each other somehow, as well as those that are not quite in harmony, that compete with each other. And that wouldn't be a Venn diagram. I don't know what that would be. But something along those lines that gives you an idea of where things are competing with each other, and that could help with the prioritization.
Darren, it reminds me of the infinity circle that we did for, I think it was a staff exercise and a community exercise, in which we did place the strategies on how interrelated they were, and we could bring that to life in a future draft.
Absolutely. And just to briefly answer your question, Lisa, we had worked on the structure of the document, and when we were looking at the relationship between outcomes and strategies, we were doing exactly what Mary did, which was to say, this strategy achieves 3 of these outcomes, this outcome relates to 4 of these strategies, and so there were so many lines this way and that they don't, there are multiple relationships between them, which is why there's not one-to-one. Okay.
So I get to reveal which ones you all came to different points about understanding where you'd like to discuss. So highlighted here is in different colors and forms. Anything in black you didn't need to discuss is what we heard from 11 out of 13 of you. So I'll just ask, as we move through each of these, would you confirm these are not ones you need to discuss, because in fact you support them moving forward for the final plan, and that's something you want to see in the final plan. So we can do that now, and you can take a look at these 2 that are on the screen. In future focus areas, there are more that you didn't need to discuss. The other things that are indicated here is if it is bold white, that means one person indicated that they would like to discuss this item. And if it is underlined, also bold and white, underlined indicates that more than one person wanted to discuss this. So we will begin with the one that had the most interest, that is underlined, the very first one. But before we do that, I just want to ask number 5 and 8 that were not ones that people indicated they need to discuss tonight. Is that true, that you feel that this is one that you'd like to see in the adoption steps to support it, to move forward? And if so, sorry, you have a question first, okay?
So in going through this number 8, developing a learning laboratory approach, I wasn't really clear how you would do that. So in the National Park System, which you come from, there are permits that you apply to the department, and then those permits are evaluated by a group of staff and maybe some outside scientists, and then somebody comes in with a proposal, and then that proposal is reviewed. It usually doesn't entail any exchange of money. But how are you going to do this laboratory approach, and are you going to have permits, and how would that be done so that you make sure that the people out there are doing what we need to have done in terms of getting this information?
So this is a perfect example of something that would gather more detail in the implementation planning, but I can tell you that we do have a funded research program, and so it's very similar to what you just described. We're also looking at making sure that we describe our science in a way that's applied research, so that we're applying that in a piloted way to land management practices and making sure that we use that data in an adaptive management framework. And so that's the intent and import behind that question. And certainly, so what I'm wondering is, would you like to discuss that strategy more?
No, I just was wondering, and if we'll get to financial sustainability, but that does take time, it does take staff, it does require resources, and I'm concerned about putting on a new thing without those resources, but I think we need to look at these in holistic approach, as well as having some research is always good.
Okay.
So, but I don't want to.
Well, we want to make sure that if there's something you need clarification on in order to support it moving forward, if this phrase moving forward into the final plan, we need to hear that. But typically, if I hear a lot of words about how is this going to happen, that's going to be my indication that that may be about implementation. Okay. And so then we'll say, let's come back to the strategies and talk about, is this strategy working? So with that, our 5 and 8, do those items look like ones anyone else need to discuss, or a raise of hands if you are comfortable with this one, these two being supported in the plan, for the plan moving forward for adoption? Okay, great. And then we'll start with number 1, which we had more than one person indicating that they wanted to discuss this one, conserve and restore Boulder's natural heritage. So that was in one of our examples. Does anyone want to start with discussion of that one, since it was one that had a little bit more interest? We want to give it some time. Yes, go ahead.
So this is on page 32 of underneath well, first of all, under the first big one, ecosystem health and resilience. This goes to some of the comments that we've received from the public about wanting more detail. But it says, using the best available science, we protect healthy ecosystems and mend those how we have impaired. And the question is, in protecting healthy ecosystems, how? And that goes more to details, I think, in terms of, for example, under strategies, conserve and restore Boulder's natural heritage. We strive to maintain and enhance a network of healthy, resilient habitats for native plants and animals, large, connected, and unfragmented habitat areas rather than smaller fragmented ones, et cetera. Where is the data for this? I would like to see data in the plan so that we can actually see where these are, the large unfragmented habitat areas, how many there are, what size are they, and how do we get to, one of the persons who wrote to us talked about no net loss. And in terms of if something happens to one of these so that a chunk gets fragmented off, someone else referred to open space being lost not by a large act, but by 1,000 acts, but by 1,000 cuts. And so this would be the kind of thing that I, at any rate, and I think many members of the public would find useful, data, and so that we can follow trends over time, and it becomes apparent rather than abstract, what it is that we're looking at.
So that raises a question for me, which is, to what extent was the fact that the draft plan was released as a Word document mean that some of this type of information was left for a later time?
Well, one element in that is being a master plan. We're going to have it for a long time. The planning horizon is over 10 years. And so sometimes with that, the data will be ever changing and need to be updated. So we need to refer to other elements. So my question in that is, are you looking for the strategy statement itself to be changed in some way, or are you looking for it to be amended with data points?
Amended with data points so that the data points are in there. Again, trends over time. We're starting with a baseline. So what are we starting with? Where do we go? How does it look? For example, on the page 35, there's permits issued for off-trail use and habitat conservation areas 2007 to 2019. And at the very end, it says, of the blocks, it says average number of people per year from 2007 to 2012. And it's for the uses, and all of the numbers are given, but it doesn't break it out. For example, how many were there in 2007 and how many were there in 2019? So that we can see what's happening over time, which goes to, one of our writers wrote and talked about the numbers growing 25% from 2005, 4.7 million visitors, to 6.25 million in 2017, an increase of 25%, so that we can see where we are now and then moving forward, how well we're actually managing what it is we're striving to manage.
Aaron?
Or not.
Thank you for this, Cindy. I think the master plan system overview, is full of data about, where we are now and where we've been. And it seems like it would be really helpful to get some of that into the master plan. I mean, you can't get all, this is its own 200-page thing, right?
Right.
But
right.
like some representative, as you're preparing a final plan, pulling in representative data from the system overview and maybe other places seems like it would be really helpful, but then maybe also referencing it. Say like, hey, and there's a whole bunch more
Right.
here. And then just to your point about tracking things, I don't know if you all have thought about having something, we have dashboards that the city maintains. I don't know how many of them are OSMP data points right now, but it's a great way to put in data that we track over time.
I'll just answer that briefly and just say that we're in coordination with the city on that as they develop a citywide approach to developing those metrics. And so we've had initial conversations, and the master plan sets us up for developing that further. So we're having those conversations.
So I wanted to underscore what you just said, which is, because this is going to come up again and again and again under every one of these strategies, is this is general, and how do we link it? So yes, we need to tie it, and maybe there's the citations from which sections are relevant in this document. I also think that you mentioned somewhere in the plan, it talks about 80 metrics or 80 data indicators are currently measured by open space staff. And it could be that those relevant to various areas could be highlighted in sidebars or something, or anyhow, we'll want to cross-link these so it feels more, that there's more content, because we know there's content backing this up, but it's not all in here. It's not a good way to cross-reference.
And where it is referenced, as in on the graph that I pointed to, that it's really clear, so that we can see what it is that's happening, not just that so many permits have happened between this space of time, but how they've grown or how they've decreased or whatever.
So graphical representation.
Yeah.
Well, I think trends. I think that what I'm hearing is trends.
And the uses. So I know when we started this permit system, we weren't going to try to stop people, but, in reading this master plan, it's very clear we want to try to limit off-trail uses. and we want to repair fragmentation of our ecosystem. So when I look at this particular table that Cindy pulled out, it's like none of these are for research, it doesn't seem like. And so I guess I would like to know, like national park permits, you have to write something up every year when you get a permit to go in the backcountry or off trail. So there's a report that's expected. And so maybe this is too much in the weeds, and this will come up
Yeah.
at the implementation, but that data needs to come out.
So back to number 1, conserve and restore Boulder's natural heritage. Any refinements for the strategy? I haven't heard any at this point for the actual language of the strategy, or but more of how it's treated in the text. Is there anything else on that one that you wanted to discuss?
Well, I'm gonna, this will be another theme, which is, yeah, of course, duh, yes, that's very important. So when and how, right?
Okay.
And I know we're gonna just say, oh, that's implementation, that's next year, but know that that's a very unsatisfying answer. So I guess, and I think that'll come up again, is, come on, we need to prioritize it. We need to know which plans are likely or in the mix, or, I'm sure that the Board of Trustees have thought about, you know what, we know these are the high-ticket ones, and these are the ones we're probably going to recommend to council and to, but anyhow, I think you'll meet a lot less resistance if we know that some of these high-priority ones are likely to end up on the work plan next year, and how we're going to bite some of this off, that we know are top priorities.
So we've been going through sort of at a staff level of a lumping phase and a splitting phase of when to bring things together. And when you bring things together, they tend to get a little bit diluted as opposed to split. And this is one where we have had that discussion of whether or not we ought to split these two up into two different strategies, because conserving Boulder's natural resources is a sort of a different type of strategy than restoring. So the conserving side is good. There's some lands that are in very good condition, and our strategies around that should be to sustain and to keep that integrity going, where the restoring element is recognizing that there's work to be done, and they're high quality, but there's work to be done there. And perhaps there's enough interest in what we're hearing tonight is, instead of the lumping that we ended up is maybe we should split those out, provide a little bit more meat to both sides of that equation, which will then kind of help us to understand a little bit better about what that strategy is actually meaning.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, and I think having maps would be really helpful. So I found myself in reading some of this, well, I'm not on the Open Space Board of Trustees, but where are the areas that need to be restored? What's their proximity? What kind of environment are they in? What kind of restoration are we talking about? And it goes all the way through the plan. So I think maps would be helpful, and like maps where the different species are. Anyway.
I just want to check and see, there was a mention of potentially splitting, restore, and conserve. Is there any support for that idea of splitting them up? If so, raise your hand. I wanted to see if there's some indication of that. Splitting them in the strategy to different strategies rather than having them combined. I saw maybe one.
As long as they don't get lost.
And I was going to say a stronger, instead of conserve, and I'm just throwing this out there, this is weedy, it could be protect. Protect just seems stronger to me than conserve. Conserve could be a jam.
By splitting them, it allows us a little bit more narrative room to do some further description of it. And that would be the benefit. We're not going to come up with that tonight,
Yep.
but it will allow us to go back and provide some more descriptive narrative to both of them by doing the splitting.
Okay. I see Dave over there. Yeah, hi Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this strategy is a good example of a number of them that we're going to have to deal with. And that's the concern I have about the draft now. It doesn't seem to have the substance to deal with the really hard questions or issues that we're going to have to confront. And this is a good one because there are a lot of data out there. So it's not like the numbers aren't there, and this is a question we keep asking the community. We've asked them this question probably for 30 years, and it keeps coming back at, the highest ranking, community response. And so from my perspective, it's like, let's quit asking them the question. We know, let's get after it and do what needs to be done. So that is what I'm concerned about on this one and throughout, the strategies, is there's got to be a context for people to understand what it is that we or the city or the open space and Mountain Parks Department is proposing. And it doesn't have to be so specific that it becomes trivial, but there has to be some things in there that says, for example, here's what we've been doing, we'll continue, or here's some things that we're going to consider. And then in addition to that, there has to be a budgetary number attached to it. People have to understand, okay, this is what it's going to take, this is the priority, and this is the estimate of how much it's going to cost, and in order for them to understand, the importance of these strategies. And I think this is clearly the community's number one recommendation. And we do it a disservice by not having, the sufficient substance to acknowledge the importance of this particular strategy.
I was just going to maybe add some perspective on this, and this is certainly a lot of the work that the staff in my division is working on this all the time, and it really is very prescribed through the grassland plan and the forest ecosystem management plan and the agricultural resource management plan, which has a lot of the detail that I think we never had a master plan. And we did all this great planning at the scale that you're looking for in the past. Now, some of that needs to be relooked at and updated, and I think this master plan will now call for that to happen, and it gives us a good opportunity to move forward and come back to you with a revised grassland plan at the right time that gets into a lot of maybe some of the, how have we done on these best implementation areas? Have we succeeded? And that's something that is kind of the bigger perspective that is one way to look at this master plan. It's setting the framework. We have all these very detailed plans and operations that go on constantly that address a lot of these issues that are a concern.
So John, before I move on, can I ask with that was brought up, should we split this idea of conserve and restore? Did you have a feeling on that so we can then come back to folks? And I didn't get really good hand signals from people. I wasn't really clear on if you felt strongly about that. But if we do, we want to note that before we move on.
It is generally combined in the other plans, but I think either way.
Okay.
Well, can I just note that some of these they're not all equal. Like under restore, you have reduce undesignated trails, control invasive weeds. I mean, some of them are subsets, right? So they kind of nest better, because EHR1 is kind of like the thing, and then most of them nest in some ways. So anyhow, that's part of the, I don't know, hard to get your hand around the organization.
Aaron, and then maybe we can test that idea of what refinement we need to this particular strategy.
So I'm fine separating them. That's perfectly all right. But just to make a little bit of a larger point, I mean, John, I think you raised an excellent point, and I think we have some understanding of that. But just in looking through the first few sections of the master plan, that's not really clearly articulated. So that might be something really, really good to do, is to have some section where we say, hey, we've done a lot of detailed work already, and it's in all these things, and they could be hyperlinks so people can look at them all. And so that's where you look for the details of implementation that we've already planned for. And here are some that are staler and need some updating, and here are some new ones that we think we will be doing. But look to those detailed plans for how we're implementing things, which is a little different from what the master plan itself is about.
Okay. So the suggestion of refining by splitting conserve and restore. Anyone really needing to see that? I want to see a show of hands, and then we can come back to comments.
The question that Dan suggested a little while ago, which is, I think, the reason why you're not getting a clear hand raising on that question, is is it adding substance to the conserve part, or is it splitting? And for me, I don't care whether they're combined or split. I just want to make sure that there's more than 5 lines for conserve.
Okay.
So that would be helpful for us to understand tonight, and recognizing that this was the only one in this focus area that was underlined, meaning a lot of people wanted to talk about this. So we've spent more time on this one, and we'll have to prioritize our time on the others accordingly. But just to make sure we understand if there are any content changes, whether we split it or keep them together, that would satisfy council and board, that would be helpful for us to understand. Is there anything of substance that's missing?
I hear more. Yeah.
Yep.
So I hear the more emphasis on conserve, more attention to that.
Well, it's also to link it to the specifics, and I think what people are dying to know is the what next part, and so, again, on the extend on, I mean, like, 2 and 3 are pretty clear. There's a process to deal with undesignated trails that's even referenced, the same with on-trail requirements, but a lot of the other ones are way less clear about what happens. Certainly which ecosystems we're going to prioritize restoring and how we're going to decide, and what the heck does that mean? So anyhow, again, if it means implement the grasslands plan, then for God's sakes, link to it and say so. You know, that kind of stuff would be really helpful.
Great.
And the emphasis, I think, is on the protection, because the restoration comes after what we're trying to protect gets trashed.
Sure.
So if we emphasize protection rather than coming in afterwards and cleaning up after things have been degraded or exploited or whatever, it's kind of a backwards way of going about it.
Okay.
So I think it's a lot of that is emphasis.
And,
Sorry.
and I have a question about, so you have reduced human disturbance, and then at some other point, I think it's under recreation, it's connect trails. And it's like, I need to know a lot more about that, because it seems to be contradictory. And so there's different things in these 5 areas that in and of themselves being in there are somewhat contradictory to other parts. So
Yep, so we recognize that, we said from the beginning, we weren't going to be able to make site-specific decisions in the plan. So we're not saying where to connect the trails or which undesignated trails to restore, but we are setting ourselves up for the policy conversations and the framework for making those decisions after this. So that's why we want to make sure tonight that we're setting ourselves up strongly for that.
So we will have those discussions, because I'm sure we all have different opinions about.
Not during our time on
Policy.
council. We're not getting to that.
Right, so those site-specific decisions will come in subsequent planning and engagement processes.
But one of the things that Lisa's talking about with the trails is that if they are linked, one trail over here is linked to one over here, then it's increasing fragmentation of the area. So one of the ways to protect it is not to fragment it. So it's that kind of, which is a broader policy issue than which trails where.
That's right, and the whole issue of, do we want to continue to build new trails?
Kurt,
That's up for discussion.
Kurt, I see you wanting to say something there.
Well, you said something that sounds like a policy statement. I think it's on. Hello? Thanks. Cindy, you said something that sounded like a policy statement regarding these large habitat blocks. You said no net loss. Now,
Yes.
Is that the sort of thing that should be put into the master plan? It's not a location-specific statement. It's a global strategy or objective.
From my perspective, absolutely, it should be put into the master plan. Otherwise, the master plan it just sounds nice if we don't give some policy direction. So,
That's what we do.
yeah, that's what we do.
So I think when you're asking for substance,
Give that man a mic.
when you're asking for substance, what we're suggesting is include substance in the description. So if you want substantive comments, that's one. It needs more substance. And I think that, that's a context type of example, and I think, provided a number of examples that you could incorporate.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we've summarized things before we move on, just so we can address the other conversations we need to. So what I've got is that for this first strategy, we need to make it more clear. We need to link to more detailed and related plans where we have more information available, as well as a system overview report. Place more emphasis on protection. And I heard the aspiration for no net loss. So I just want to get head nods that that's a concept that we'd like to see incorporated into the description before we move on.
And additional maps.
Data.
Additional.
Data.
I like data and maps. I don't know what no net loss means. That seems like a very big, vague thing to say. So I would need a much deeper dive on that and a very clear definition before I saw something like that written into a master plan.
Okay, so we'll take that back and explore that.
So, and looking at our time, I want to move kind of quickly through the next few because they are ones that we heard only from one person that they need to talk about. 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9 before we move on to the end. And we've already exhausted the time we set aside for this particular focus area. So I want to kind of move quickly, if we can, through discussion of what refinement or clarification folks might need about the ones that are white on this page. So reduce undesignated trails. Does someone need to discuss that one for refinement or clarification?
I'm going to assume you're doing that? You're looking at that in the master plan?
Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I just gave the general areas. I didn't go through and say, oh, I want you to do, I gave them to both of you guys.
Okay. So here's one way we can also do this, just to prioritize our limited time. So if there are comments or thoughts that council, for example, would like to put out there, if we don't have time to talk about those tonight, then we can start to assemble the list that board might need to explore more tomorrow. So as it relates to these others, with that in mind, are there any concepts that council members would like to put out there for board members to further consider?
Well, I just want to respond to Aaron's concern about the no net loss and ask that maybe that would be something that we would ask for the Open Space Board of Trustees to give us a summation of that, not necessarily tonight, but they could send that to us. I mean, I've got an image in my own mind, but whether or not, given the time constraints, now is the time to discuss it. I don't know.
Well, you don't even have nouns. No net loss of habitat, contiguity. I mean, you could have lots of nouns in there, so.
Right. Well, I was thinking of large unfragmented places, for example, that get whittled away until they're not large unfragmented places, but they're whittled away places, just for a specific noun.
So it sounds like future discussion of that item. So we would need to know, are these strategies on target that we just discussed, or are there any other refinements before we move on to the next one? Any other refinements to those strategies?
This will be maybe my only comment, but on reducing undesignated trails, I think it's absolutely correct to say, especially in sensitive habitat areas, and to take ecological considerations into account. But I think we also need to say, and considering other factors such as the destination served by the undesignated trail, we've sort of, in the example is, well, something that just goes out somebody's backyard, and sure, there are lots of social trails that serve almost no redeeming purpose and are easy calls. But it's also true that, more than half of all the climbing formations on open space aren't served by a designated trail. And it would be an enormous change in policy to say, well, wait a minute, you need to have a designated trail to go to those destinations. And most of them, the only reason the trail isn't designated was there was no need to designate it. It was sort of working reasonably well and getting people to where they wanted to go. And some of those have probably been in existence for 50 years. So I would just, without proposing anything in terms of any specific one, just say we also ought to consider, what is the function that the trail performs in evaluating whether to designate it, close it, et cetera.
Tom, you're
See some
saying
head
that
nods.
there are a lot of destinations that are served by multiple trails, and closing off a social trail wouldn't preclude getting to that destination, but a lot of the climbing trails are the only way to get to a particular destination.
Right, a lot of the major climbing formations in the Flatirons are only served by one trail, and it's an undesignated trail.
And that's why typically when we make calls on undesignated trails, it's usually done through a public process. Trail study areas, when we'll make calls on designated, undesignated trails because of that topic is one of them. So it's not a unilateral one staff person behind closed doors making that call. It's usually through a public process in which we make some of these calls.
Okay, so here, clarification there. Any other strategies before we move on that need refinement on this page? Yes.
I have a question for council on nighttime use. It's not specifically addressed anywhere, but it hasn't been called out by previous councils. And when I look at EHR 4, it talks about light pollution and noise pollution. It doesn't talk about nighttime use per se. And I'd like to hear from council about whether it should conceptually include nighttime use.
Well, that's getting into the hornet's nest, aren't we?
Of course, all this is.
Don't a lot of our parks close at sunset?
So we actually, I believe we have an open night policy, but there are some parking lots that do close, but our system is open. And I would just offer briefly as it relates to the data component of this and why you're not seeing it in the plan right now is if you remember back to the system overview report, we put the data there where we've looked at our visitor surveys and the trends over time. And in the last decade, actually nighttime use has reduced by half. So we're really seeing less than 1% of our visitation happening between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. And so that's why staff didn't feel like the trend was sort of in the reverse direction. It didn't call for a particular action at this time.
Yeah, I just remember when it came up in 2005, it was a hornet's nest. Not pretty.
There are certain areas in the system where nighttime use is more prevalent than others. Flagstaff is an example where it's more prevalent, and so we could explore it in certain areas where we do see more nighttime use than in other areas.
And I think one reason to close the loop is that the system overview report calls out the overarching issues that came from the 2005, but we never go through a process in this plan to say, we don't need to worry about that one anymore. This one's already been addressed. And I just put it out there for council. Again, that was quite a while ago, but it is sort of in council's documents that was a charge to open space.
You go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say, I'm assuming it's an issue, but I guess before we tackle something, especially that we know is going to be controversial, we should know that we have a problem to solve. And I guess I would ask that question about night use because we know we have other problems to solve that are top priorities. And so if night use is declining, we haven't known, we don't have specific species we're worried about. I say, interesting question, put it on the parking lot for future things to consider if there's ever a lull. You don't want it to go away, but if it ain't a problem now, we got so many others. I guess that's what I would say.
Well, and I would also add to that, we're just beginning to enforce our dark skies ordinance on July 31st. That goes into effect. And it'll be interesting to see what that does, having dark skies in the city of Boulder. And, it'll take a while to enforce, but that should have a phenomenal impact on just our nighttime wildlife and light pollution and things like that. So I would like to see how that moves. I'm agreeing with Zan, and I think that should be put in the parking lot, but it should be monitored coupled with the dark skies ordinance and how that is being enforced as we start enforcing and improving.
So what I'm hearing is reduce and monitor human disturbance. I mean, just by doing that, staff will be thinking of ways where we could not only implement, but do things of keeping track of certain things
Right.
just to see if there are
we
issues.
have a bunch of overlapping ordinances.
But the other thing is, if we're starting off with the preserve, protect, conserve, then this is another area where someone wrote into us and said this is the time when the species get to rest. So I wouldn't use this to try and bring more people into open space, particularly if they're If they have their canine companions, talk about hornet's nests. But to just give everything a rest out there. And if it's declining, I think that's, again, for those species that we're trying to preserve and protect, it's a good thing.
I'll agree with Zan. I thought it was a good analysis. I'll just note we also did not do public outreach around this question.
All right, so let's move on then to the rest, because I believe we have enough on this one from your notes, as well as we've heard which refinements you're looking for, as well as if they're on target. So agriculture today and tomorrow. On this one, you can see many more that you didn't have a need to discuss. And so I'll ask again for a show of hands. Everything that is in black, it's number 1, 3, 4, 6, and 8. If these are elements in which you would support moving forward in the plan. So show of hands if you're on board with those, they're on target. I see on target.
Can we note that Sam talked about quantification of the water resource, I believe, in his remarks? So I don't know where that goes, but it looks like it might go under one of the blacks. So I'm just noting.
Okay. So I think I saw everyone, but was there anyone are there any of the ones that are in black that you would like to discuss?
I would just like some clarification on this diversification of agricultural operations. What does that mean? For example?
You could start by pointing the page, because
I'm going to let John answer that.
So in the agricultural resource management plan, which we just passed 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago, we called for developing areas for sort of diversified vegetable farming, pastured livestock, micro dairies, kind of not the traditional ranching. And in that plan, we identified, I think, 9 different locations where we would start to try to do that and make those opportunities have the infrastructure and the water and the soils that were conducive to those and make them available. And I think we've now done 3 or 4 of them. We've been kind of doing 1 a year. It takes a lot of work to do them, but that's the sort of diversification that we're looking for. There is some demand for it. We know that there are farmers interested in taking up these opportunities, and we will continue to implement the Ag Resource Management Plan to do that.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I guess I do have one comment, kind of on 3 and 4, which is I think we're doing fantastic work, and by we, I mean you guys. I think in the past, we have not been as good as we intended on reaching out to lessees and including them in conversations at the right time that would be much more efficient and collaborative and actually build community rather than schism things. So I guess for both supporting the success of future agriculture, whatever that looks like, and how does it evolve to deal with climate and also our changing diets, or however we want to, if we ever want to look at growing beef on, the issue that came up before about beef versus diversified ag. I mean, that's a public conversation, and you can imagine it may evolve over time. And I guess I just want to say, I think we really need to up our game or continue the trend, which I've seen recently, of better including and integrating those conversations, and we will have much more success if we do that. And then I'll note that the county it seems like they're doing parallel things, and I know there's some integration, but anyhow, the less we can recreate the wheel and avoid some of the stumbles that we make or they make, and then we repeat on the other side, I think that would really, I'm sorry, I'm being long-winded, making sure we incorporate that better going forward, I think will serve us all, however that looks.
Yes, agreed, and we do collaborate quite closely with the county staff. Their system is much different than ours in terms of,
The soil, to start.
Right, but the techniques that work and,
Right.
yeah.
And I've got a comment over here.
So I think with 3 and 4, I'd just like to really see the consideration of what agriculture is going to look like in the next 50 to 100 years and realize that the same thing we've been doing over and over again, it's not going to continue to work with the changing of our culture, the changing of the environment, the global warming that we say we're experiencing, and that we realize that we have to find new innovative ways to have agriculture and that it might look different, like with hemp or bee farming or carbon sequestration with key lining or biochar, and that it might not actually be ranching that we continue to do that produces so much carbon footprints. It's well documented. So I just would like to know that, have it be clear that what it looks like now is most likely and hopefully not what it's going to look like in 50 to 100 years.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that. When you have people like Jane Goodall saying we need to change what we're doing and how we're eating, like yesterday, I think we do at some point need to have a much longer discussion about agriculture and how it is, and are we going to stay the course? And I know everybody, and it's in this document, there's this romantic view of these ranches, but I'm sorry, we have to also recognize that things are going to change, and that how ranches or farms are going to look have to change. And we can't, as Mirabai said, keep doing the same thing. It's insanity, so.
Which I think is what 4 is about, on page 63.
Okay.
Yeah, but to me, there's a little bit of conflict between support the success of ranchers and farmers and diversify. I think there's a huge conflict there, or contradiction. So I agree with Zan. We should be on stuff a little earlier, and where I think we're going to be. But I think also we can't be continuing to be cattle ranchers, and the cattle have been here for 100, 150 years, and other species have been here for hundreds of thousands of years.
Okay. So getting back on target with our goals for this evening of talking about the strategies and if they're on target, the ones that you noted that you want to potentially discuss refinement or clarification are in white here. Let's go to the ones that are underlined, because I know there was more than one person that wanted to discuss the underlined ones. So number 7, reduce agricultural impacts from prairie dogs. Let's get into that one. There are a couple of people who want to discuss it. Go ahead and get started.
Well, I'll just start off. I'll say, well, that's not an objective comment, and I still want to see the science that prairie dogs are doing all the damage, which has not been given to us. And to think that it's just one species, when in fact it's a perfect storm of non-management, of overgrazing, of whatever. So I think that needs to be discussed, but not in those terms.
Okay. Other feelings on that? Do we have others in agreement about the statements that just made?
I'll second what Lisa said, in that it comes from drought, it comes from overgrazing from other animals other than prairie dogs, and there's no science behind it for the prairie dogs, so I'd like to see that happen.
So I just need to add that there is quite a bit of science, and it is there, and it has been sent to us. So just, it's there. I'm happy to forward it.
Right.
You know,
but,
you have to read it.
Right, but like any other science, it's controversial. So there's not one answer, and I can give you as many papers that say the contrary of the papers that we have gotten. So anyway, this isn't the point of this discussion tonight.
Right. It's not a discussion. We've talked about this.
And staff does have recent direction from you all to go look at this in detail, and we'll be coming back to you on this issue if it's helpful.
And I just note that this does align with the Prairie Dog Working Group's recommendations, that part of their recommendations were to reduce conflicts between agriculture and prairie dogs, and that seems to be what this is calling out. So it feels like something that that group has agreed that we should look into.
Good point, and I would just say exactly what you said, reduce conflicts between agriculture and prairie dogs, instead of saying it's all from prairie dogs.
That might be a better way to word it.
So maybe amend what we call these our handles, the abbreviated, so work on the handle here.
Yep.
Okay.
To reduce conflict. I think that, yeah.
Okay. Number 9, enhance soil health and resilience. There were a few people who wanted to discuss this one.
just makes sense. I think it's good. I think we're learning a lot about carbon sequestration, about biochar, about better soil health, about cover crops. So I don't know what you want us to say, but.
Was there any refinement for this particular one, number 9, that needed to happen to the strategy?
I guess I might add, well, soil health, resilience, and its role in carbon sequestration. And I guess, we want it to be healthy and resilient. We also want it to help us address climate change. So in some ways, that means to enhance its natural role. So I guess I might tinker with that, or mention, and its role in carbon sequestration, since it's something that we might.
Seeing a few other head nods around that change to it.
Okay, all right.
Great.
Okay. Any other items under 9? Okay, then we'll go into item 2, integrate native ecosystems in agriculture. There was one person who wanted this to be brought up for discussion. Maybe we've already talked about it enough. Okay, and number 5, enhance enjoyment and protection of working landscapes. Any items around this for discussion?
Is this getting at like farm to table and that kind of stuff, enjoyment? Or just that people understand what's going on, or what?
So this one is trying to capture a couple things. We look at the scenic quality of the working landscapes that's important to the fabric of the Boulder Valley, as well as the recreational components, for example, out at Taylor Farm, where we have the opportunity to support multiple charter purposes.
But does it also address things like allowing hoop houses, or, ways? Anyhow, does it get at, it says protect working landscapes. I was just curious, the working part of the landscapes, looking at our regs, or is that embodied in another one, or not at all?
I think that would be a substantive, I'm sorry?
Really more in ATT4, I think.
In terms of hoop houses? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, so hoop houses would be something that we look at under diversifying agricultural operations, because there are infrastructure needs that need to be addressed in order to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to a general point at the beginning, where this is a good example where the master plan could reference the ag plan and quote even the page number, and then people have the backing up of the evidence.
I actually think to that end, I think that's a great suggestion. You can imagine sidebars for each one of these that talks about current trends, relevant existing plans, or sites to go for more information, or whatever, possible future action items that kind of seed some things, but just so that it's really accessible to people for, I think actually all of the strategies might be helpful.
Karen?
And when John mentioned previously that number 4 had to do with 9 specific sites, I think distinguishing which of these has to do with which acreages on the land would really clarify what each one was talking about.
Yeah, and again, maps would help.
Yep, maps and designating the amount of acreage and where it's located for each of these items.
Well, and also what's surrounding it? Is it other open space, or is it urban, some kind of urban interface?
Right.
I don't think we have that, but, well, we do with Shanahan.
Can I just say, Karen, that's a great point. I just might offer that maybe that it was with the caveat, like currently we're looking at, because we might be updating plans, it might shift a little bit just to make sure that's not set in stone.
And you're pointing out some items that in the very introduction about the draft, the note to the readers, that this is an unformatted version. You're giving us a lot of notes about what will be helpful when we are formatting it and bringing it together so we can display it in that way. Because as you noted, this is a Word document, knowing that there would be refinements and edits to it. In that later phase, we can display things differently and connect ideas together in a different way. So it's helpful for thinking through those refinements of maps and other elements to be added. Okay, so I think we've moved through every item on this list for agriculture today and tomorrow for strategies and refinements. Any more before I move on?
I have a question. I may have commented, but I don't think so, because I gave just very general. But reduce or eliminate pesticide use. So again, I mean, this is a good goal. So is it just a goal and how we're going to do it? I mean, I thought we were pretty much free of pesticides, but I guess we're not, or herbicides.
Yeah, we are pretty free. In fact, we've now phased out glyphosate at the operational level, Lisa. So,
I am very happy, since it was about a year ago when I had a heart attack and saw that happening.
So, and we will continue to do that. It is a balance with invasive species and, you know, how do we manage that situation?
Right, and to that point, and maybe we just have offline conversation, but are there places, is there a way, so I was walking on 4 Mile Canyon Creek, the Greenway, and there's weeds coming in there, and so I started picking some, but it's like, is there a way to get volunteers to come out and do this? And
We need an invasive weed app.
well, what we need is, and you talk about all these volunteers you have, but it would be very cool if you had like and maybe you have, but a hotline or something like that where you say, hey, there's a bunch of weeds here right now. I've been going around and picking these goat's heads.
Sounds like an idea for the implementation, future steps.
Yep,
to engage in.
and we do get a number of emails every year, and
I'll send you some more.
Yeah,
Yeah, I found some myrtle spurge the other day. It was
yeah.
great.
Myrtle spurge is a big one. Yeah.
Hey, I have one wording, this is really, I think you should say further reduce, because you've done so much, and I think it's clear for the public that
Yeah.
it's not like we don't already do that.
And really, you should be reassured on the agricultural side, we're pretty, I mean, we have not had any applications in the past 2 crop years, so it's really low. It's not a big issue.
I just want to make sure we get Sam's point in here about our agricultural water rights, and maybe we could get a memo on that. What is the value of those water rights as an asset? And how do we assess the use of those rights by those who benefit from them?
And we'll just offer that, you know, our current estimate, which is recognizably outdated, is $60 to $70 million. But that's a process that we recognize we need to go to understand the current value. And the county, for example, is undergoing that process. And it's a very slow, methodical process to go through that. It's similar to the real estate market where things shift. But yeah, thank you.
Okay. I think we're ready to move on to responsible recreation stewardship. So with this one, there are a number of items there that are black, that were ones that you didn't bring up that you needed to discuss, that you would support moving forward into the plan, the final plan. So I want a show of hands of all the ones in black, numbers 1, 2, 4, 6, and 9, if they are on target. So can I get a show of hands of if all of those you believe are on target?
I do, but I had one comment.
One comment, okay, I'll come back. Can we come back, should we?
Sure.
Okay. Anyone else on our 1, 2, 4, 6, and 9?
Yeah.
Are these all on target? I have a few people there, so there's, okay. So I know who to call on, who needs to discuss one that's in black. Okay, so that's quite a few of you. All right, so those that are in black, there were a couple of you that didn't raise your hands. Aaron, you wanted a clarification on one of them?
Well, just want to make a comment on number 6, which was the improving the trail connections. Just, I don't think it called out specifically the opportunity for regional, prioritizing regional connections. It mentions regional partnership in the initial language, but I don't think it says to really search out opportunities for regional connections. And I'll make the point that doesn't always necessarily involve fragmentation. I think about, for example, the Union Pacific Trail, now the RTD trail that we have an opportunity to do, which is an existing right-of-way. It used to have a railroad on it, still has tracks, but would make a great regional trail. It's in the plans. So I'd just love to see a little bit of language about searching for those bigger regional connections.
Right, and so I was going to bring that up as well, and we have the Rocky Mountain Greenway, and I don't know what kind of, I'll have to get with the you and see where we are with the Rocky Mountain Greenway going north, but I have some concerns when you say improved trail connections. I'm on board on regional, but I'm also concerned about fragmentation. So I'd like to know what that means, improved trail connections, because it could mean a lot of things, some of which I'm fine with and some I'm not.
Well, Who's calling on him?
Dave?
Yeah, I have a question on number one, on support a range of recreational opportunities. Actually, in the draft, it says a diverse range, and I guess I would like to know exactly what that means, because I think the charter spells out very clearly what the recreational opportunities are. And I think we open up a can of worms if we start using nomenclature like a range of diverse recreational opportunities.
I would just like to, that's exactly what I was going to say, Dave, about, supporting a range of recreational opportunities. They're spelled out in the charter. And so I'm also very uncomfortable with this range. And I don't know why it's even there.
Well, okay, I have an idea.
Okay?
I think what we mean is a range of recreational experiences. Hang on.
I'm listening.
We know that it's, and maybe you should say, support a range of passive recreational experiences. But I think that's everything from, we have some trails that are accessible to wheelchairs. We have some that are wide, so you can take your whole family and then dog on it and not, and people can pass. You have others that are rugged and go to wilder places that few people use. That's a range of experiences. We're going to have some places where kids can get close to the water and play. Anyhow, I think that that's what this means, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if need be, we can say passive recreational experience, but it's experiences. They don't all have to be 8-foot wide multi-use trails.
What I wouldn't want to do, I think, is put the expectation out there, whether it's an experience or a opportunity, that it's open to beyond those that are spelled out as passive, except for those that are noted in the charter. So that we don't build in an expectation that someone wants to play whatever.
Well, then add the word passive.
Well,
and that just underscores.
I would add the word passive, but I would also state as defined in the charter under section blah, blah, blah. So just take it right to the charter. And that's something I kind of noticed in the master plan, is that it doesn't refer back to the charter too much, and I think they should be pretty much married. The charter sets out what we can do, and the master plan comes from that charter.
Yep. Thank you, Lisa. We said from the very beginning that the master plan was not going to change the charter, so I think we made that assumption, but there's probably an opportunity to emphasize that.
And we can also emphasize what was approved in the VMP to explain what the parameters are, what do we mean by a range, because that spells out what the passive recreation is.
Great sidebars for this section.
Yep.
Yeah, and can I
Mary?
just, Mary, do you want to go?
Go ahead.
I would offer a note of caution in terms of saying uses in the charter. Just looking at the charter language, it says land for passive recreational use, such as hiking, photography, or nature studies, and if specifically designated, bicycling, horseback riding, or fishing. So it has a such as. It doesn't have a limited to. I mean, it doesn't call out bird watching. It doesn't call out running. It doesn't call it. There's all kinds of things that people do on open space I think are perfectly fine that are not mentioned specifically in the charters. Having language that you could only do what's specifically called out would be, I think, too limiting.
I think using the word appropriate in that context would be appropriate.
Okay. Mary?
Just a general comment on all of these. The word stewardship appears in the general title, but there's, I think, might be like zero use within the strategies themselves. And I think there are opportunities to inject that more into some of these strategies. I realize that it is a lot in the educational section, but since this one has in the heading stewardship, it should, I think, in my mind, have more reference to that within the descriptions.
All right, so going back to, you've now had some clarifying items around the items that are black here that we didn't think we needed to discuss, but we did. So I want to see just a show of hands of, are these items that, after that clarification, the notes that Darren's taken here, would you feel comfortable in saying that these are support enough to move forward into the plan for, that you'll see for adoption later? Can I see a show of hands if these are ones that you'd like to see?
Can I ask a question?
Okay, so I see all hands and then a question.
So I was not clear, and all of my annotations from my master plan have disappeared. So I'm just doing it by memory. But I did have a question about provide welcoming and inspiring visitor amenities. What does that mean?
So just, Anna, I just want to ask, do you want to get into that one first, or do you want to
I think
chat about the others?
I think then we are clear that you didn't have anything on the ones that are in black. You're comfortable with those? I saw a
Well, we've
little bit of a
already
hand.
discussed one.
Just
You're
take it
okay?
as a yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then so we're going to move into item 3. There was one person who wanted to discuss that one. Lisa, was that you?
No, it
Did you
was me.
indicate that one? That was you, okay. So you both needed to talk about that one a little bit.
Well, I just wanted to know what was meant by that, and I guess I just want to be very clear that our parks and recreational facilities are very different than what our open space and mountain parks facilities are. So when I see this, it's like, what are we talking about here?
So I think just by way of a little bit more context, so the actual strategy language behind the handle talks about the fact, for example, that we own and steward a set of historic facilities in the mountain parks, for example. And so that's sort of at a policy level an intention to continue to provide those because they're part of our cultural history as well as just looking at the accessibility of the facilities, knowing that there might be some retrofits to increase the universal accessibility, for example. So looking at the ways that our existing infrastructure can continue to be welcoming and inspiring. And this is, I would offer, Marion, also a strategy where we do talk about some of that stewardship because it's a way to also, the inspiring part is where we talk about the intention to elevate opportunities to learn about the surrounding landscape through that visitor infrastructure.
Well, at the risk of getting myself in trouble, I did highlight this one, but I guess it really gets to 4, and I just want to underscore the better we build trails and the more inspiring they are, the better people stay on them. So I guess, and I think you called that out there in trail, and I guess number 4, but I highlighted 3 just to underscore that. I think that we're about quality experiences, and I think that builds better stewards and better behavior. So I guess I think that it's self-reinforcing, and it's part of, I think, we're getting better at it. I'll just put it that way.
And in the text, just beyond the handle, that's a perfect place to insert the term stewardship, I think.
For which one? I'm sorry, Mary. Just so I understand.
Number 3 that we're talking
Number
about.
3, okay.
And we could even say inspiring visitor amenities and stewardship opportunities. I think, yeah, well, you get at it under education. I think everybody that recreates and enjoys open space lands should also come away feeling inspired to volunteer to help, to give back. And I think that virtuous cycle is something we really want to hold up in this plan.
So when I see the word amenities, I don't think of cultural resources. I think of actually bathrooms. And so when we're saying inspiring visitor amenities, I'm wondering, are we trying to build inspirational bathrooms? So we ought to make sure we have the half moon in the door so we can look out.
I had a great outhouse in the Lemhi, so.
So I would suggest, especially in this context, that if it's going to be cultural resources, we spell that out or include that in whatever additional information we provide. And I would recommend, especially in this context, to replace amenities with services and delete inspiring. So we just provide welcoming, visitor services or something. I'm not sure that we need to necessarily be inspired by these things.
And we're not putting outhouses or restrooms at every one of our trailheads.
I think it means well-placed benches where you have good views. That's what I was thinking, inspiring amenities were.
Yeah, there's a much larger paragraph underneath this handle that kind of hints to what we are talking about. And again, in terms of what amenities would be at a trailhead, for instance, again, those tend to be conversations we have through trail study plans. We do get into the level of should there be an outhouse at this trailhead or not. And again, that is on-the-ground planning. That's always part of our public process for what should be on there. But as far as what we mean by amenities, we have a fairly large, beefy paragraph underneath this handle that hints towards what we're talking about.
I just think using the word amenity basically means that then if it's not, then it is where these services or places are not, it's non-amenable. And from my perspective, it's similar to what Lisa said. It's basically a minimization of a number of these things provides the experience, actually. And so it just seems prejudicial to use the term amenities, and when you compare that with where they're not, does that mean that it's not non-amenable?
I think what I hear you saying, David, and I would look to the rest of the group to see if you agree that it sounds like the concept that in response to landscape character or the desired experience, that we're thoughtful about the surrounding natural resources, that we incorporate that concept into here maybe more clearly in order to get to what you're talking about. Would that satisfy the group?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. I think then we should move on to item 5, since there was a little bit of a hint of this one needing discussion, of reducing the trail maintenance backlog. There was one person that wanted to bring this one up for discussion or clarification. Did we hit on it already? Okay. Then the one that had a little bit more interest was 7, manage increasing visitation. Anyone want to? Okay, I see a few nods in the room.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, who wants to go
That's
first?
the whole crux of the whole thing.
Oh, we're out of time.
We're over capacity.
Well, yeah, that's where like people are like, duh, so, and what are we gonna do?
And one I would include in this, and I've spoken a little bit with Dan about this, but I really like the fact that Dan and Jefferson County manager and Boulder County and all of these other little o, little s, or big O, big S, land managers are all meeting together, because I think this is a common problem. And we're not going to get this problem solved by ourselves. And so the more we can meet as land managers to discuss this, and we all, each one of our programs have different things, so some of them aren't things that are wanted in others, but we need to collaborate and discuss more how we can come to a common understanding and help manage some of this visitation a little more, so maybe people aren't coming from such far distances, and it's fine if they do come, but it's really a regional issue.
Absolutely, and just based on the responses, we just got together and kind of put together what we are actually currently already doing in terms of managing increase in visitation, and this is a list we kind of put together, just coming up with programs and projects that are sort of fresh in our mind right now of things that we're doing currently. And you'll see regional partnerships is number 1. I mean, there's probably 4 different regional groups that are now formed and up and running, with visitation being sort of the central theme of it's one of those things is we're so glad that people are connecting to our open space systems. It's good that that they love the land, that they realize the value of these habitats. However, how can we, maintain that love of land without obviously destroying what people are here to enjoy? So doing things regionally is going to be key, and that's really the thrust behind this number 1. And like I said, there's 4 different partnerships that are already forming on the Front Range that deal with that regional partnership in that regards.
Could I I just wanted to make a quick comment, and this isn't really master plan, this is more tactic.
Or what?
Tactical. Coincidentally, there's the leave no trace right above the Chautauqua access management, the shuttle and the parking. The shuttle currently has these docent type of people riding on them, and that seems like a perfect opportunity to impart leave no trace kind of information. And currently it's all about what restaurants you can go to. So I will leave it there.
I want to point out we are running a bit over time at this point, so I did want to mention that since this is one you were kind of laughing at. We needed to spend some more time discussing an items, but I want to give a time check that we are at 8:45, and we wanted to wrap up here in
7:45.
Not done.
We have an hour and 15
7:45.
minutes.
Yes, and so we want to spend 45 minutes just on the prioritization is where we thought we'd spend the later part of this. So just wanted to give a heads up to that part of it. So any other items under this managing increasing visitation?
So I think it's great that we're working with other people and everything, but I've wondered under this, have you defined carrying capacity? I mean, are there numbers that you're looking at even in ballpark terms? Or do you just keep letting everyone come? Everyone come, does the gate stay open? So they're hard questions, of
No,
course, to ask.
That's right, Cindy. And then we made a list of, what are some lifts that we can do in the near term right around this subject matter? And we came, some of these have been identified already. We need to evaluate and update the visitor use management plan, expanding presence on our system to encourage regulatory sort of compliance. Continue addressing undesignated trails. The Voice and Sight program is up for evaluation. The commercial use permit needs to be freshly evaluated. The temporal management of our system. We have one pilot project that's called for at the North Trail Study Plan. Should we call for more of those type of looking into those uses? So we have a number of things that we could envision doing early on in this master planning process that gets right to the heart of visitor use.
So one of the things that gets to the heart of visitor use, particularly in those neighborhoods where the neighborhoods are greatly affected, such as Chautauqua, is also Sanitas. Mm-hmm. And parking is, reaching those same limits that Chautauqua has done. It just goes, it's crazy. So that's another concern I think we're hearing from people who live within the community. It's free parking, but how do we manage parking at these places as well?
And I think in response to that, just to emphasize what Dan said, there is immediate actions we can take in certain locations under specific policy guidance we've got. And then there's also like a system-wide look to look at things like thresholds, et cetera. So we're wondering if it'd be a good idea to lay out those steps. What are the near-term actions we can take for this strategy? And then what are the longer-term strategies we take? So we're looking at the bigger picture while we're also taking care of some immediate issues.
And one of the things, on page 53, one of the things you address is, you talk about, there's another graph there. It doesn't give the actual numbers. It just gives percentages. But also in terms of looking at places where you anticipate more visitation in the future, that last sentence is just a little bit lame, maybe. These findings suggest the need to monitor conditions over time, especially where congestion issues are emerging. Early detection can support early action. While that's true, it's really, I'd like to see you jump on it a little more. Just with the words as well as with the actions.
It
people
seems
know.
like an easy place to strengthen to just say, we need to monitor these conditions over time, because you do, right? That's important
that's
stuff.
what we're doing, yeah.
This is one of those kinds of places where I really want to see the data displayed on a graph in the first paragraph of RRSE 7. The data that's repeated a couple of times in the plan is that there was a 34% increase in the last, 10 years?
13.
And
13 years.
if you keep that rate up, in another 10 years, we'll have another 30-some% increase. In another 10 years, we'll have another 30-some% increase. So we can't just develop a toolkit. We've really got to come to grips with, as Cindy said, what are the numbers? Is there a limit, or are we going to have a graph like in the Transportation Master Plan that projects this continuing line, or are we going to try to bend the curve? And that, to me, is the kind of policy issue that council needs to decide so that we can put that in the plan now.
So I'll just add that I think these two things where you talked about, here's stuff we already have underway, here's some additional stuff, that this is like the key place, and you got to have it in there, because I think a lot of people thought this was what the plan was going to be about. This issue was going to be a major, I mean, just because it's such the big issue. So I think getting to this level of clarity around stuff would be very helpful, because it's on everybody's mind. So.
Okay, I'm not seeing, I'm going to call this one then. I think, Anshi, can you go back to the slide? Thank you. So there was one more that one person wanted to discuss before we move on to the last of the focus areas. So that was, thank you for pulling that up, review and improve fee-based recreation programs. Any discussion items around this one before we move on?
Wait, if you didn't underscore it,
I underscored it.
who did?
So there was something you wanted to discuss this one?
I don't know if I underscored it or if three of us
Okay.
underscored it.
One
but-
person did for this, number 8.
But it was definitely one of my big ones, because I found a bunch of things in the paper, these are just recent ones, like in the last week, where people are meeting at places like, wait a minute, that's the to hike at Mountain Lion's Lair. People are meeting at, over on 93 and the parking lot over there where you go into Eldo. So people are meeting there to carpool into here. And so I was just concerned about, I thought, this is, again, goes to this being an issue of the Front Range, but also groups. Someone sent me a photograph of a van that was from one of our local large, it's actually, I think, probably all of the West Coast, if not more, firms that is into the industrial recreation, could be termed that. And so how much of when did we start monetizing open space use? How much do we permit? And where's the data for that? I think it hasn't been done always. And so I'm concerned about the growth of that this is a publicly purchased system that is enjoyed by all of us, but that it's not there for other people to be making money off of necessarily. So.
Yeah, this whole thing was confusing to me, because I wasn't sure whether fee-based recreation programs were sponsored by the Open Space and Mountain Parks Department, or whether those were actually private programs that charged participants and then they used open space. So I think there should be more clarity on this particular strategy.
Okay, that's a good point, Dave, thanks.
And I'm assuming that, I know, is it High Plains, used to be called Dowdy Draw? Anyway, we get a lot of people who come in with horses or with bikes to start off from there, and they're not from Boulder. And I know we've tried to do permitting of those, and I just don't know how well we're doing. I have no information on that. And I assume we are keeping our fees up to date. Are we? No? So then somehow that there needs to be action to make sure that we're somewhat competitive, and that you know, that those uses are being fully paid for and aren't detracting from our system.
So there is one number in here which says that the number of commercial use permits issued grew by over 60% from 2016 to 2018.
Whoa. Well, see,
Over 60%, and that the fees taken in were $34,600, which, of course, in terms of staff time and all of that, plus the usage on the space itself.
yeah, and if my recollection is right, we started those, and maybe, Tom, you can remember, like, it's somewhere with the visitor master plan, back in 2005, something like that. And my understanding was when those were brought in, that we would keep kind of track of those uses and adjust those fees over time. So that's like 14 years ago?
Yeah, so we did implement it back in 2006, right after the visitor master plan. And then we also came back to city council back in 2013, because that was one of the first issues out of the overarching issues that we took a look at. So we looked at both the parking fee and the commercial.
Right.
And so we checked in on where are we with the fee amounts for those, the application of them. For the parking fee, that's where we added the southern trailheads to the out-of-county parking fee. And then with the commercial, we made some adjustments there. We kept the fees the same, but continued to both implement and kind of refine, but also track the numbers.
But why did we keep the fees the same if inflation is happening to everybody else?
At that point, I think in 2013, we thought the fees were amenable for the types of activities were occurring. And just to give some kind of a little more detail is, of the 320 commercial use permits we had for last year, 250 of those were photography. So by far, the most common type of permit is just the individual who's doing portrait photography, et cetera, in our system. And so the kind of the others are, it's down in the teens that we're talking about, the climbing, the nature camps that are getting the permits. We had 5 commercial biking applicants last year. So that just gives a scale of when you think about those 320. It's really small scale in the individual photographers that are kind of driving that.
But that would be critical or really important to just have in the data.
Absolutely.
So they're going to review and improve?
Okay.
And we
Yeah,
got to talk about,
Okay,
three more things.
Let's go to money.
Okay,
Real
I
quickly
appreciate that
before we-
support for it. It sounds like this one is one that you're in support of reviewing and improving the fee-based recreation is what I'm hearing. Okay.
I'd like to add that we ought to put a group term in there as well, so that it's a non-fee program, but the group permitting. So just the other day when I was out running, there were a mass of bicyclists in North Boulder, and about 50 of them broke off, and I thought they were going to ride on US 36, but they turned into BVR and rode as a mass on the Eagle Trail at 6:30 in the morning. And I'm thinking, well, if I'm running on the Eagle Trail and I confront a group of 50 bicyclists, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And so I think that we ought to be looking at group permits as well as fee-based permits.
Size, you're talking about sizes.
To move into the next set, we allocate about 20 minutes for this one because we have a number of them that you already said you're cool with, you don't need to discuss further. So that is numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9. So show of hands if these are all on target, the ones that are black on the screen. All on target. Okay, we can come back for comments, but on target. I think I saw, that's all hands, I believe. Okay. No, you didn't put yours up. Okay, and Aaron has clarification. So one with clarification and another comment on one of these items in black. Aaron, do you want to bring up your
I have a
clarification?
comment here just on the number 6, the welcoming diverse backgrounds and abilities, which I think is just really important, that we make a lot of efforts to reaching out to people who don't tend to get on open space as much. But just one of the things that I know that other places have done with a lot of success is to make particular efforts to get underserved youth onto their open space systems and their natural areas. And I didn't see that really called out specifically here. So I wonder if we might mention that as one of our potential things that you list as things that we do as a focus on underserved youth and getting them into the outdoors.
Okay. And Lisa, you had an item?
Yeah, so, and I would just ask on Erin's thing, what's our outreach program for rangers, for our junior rangers? I don't know, getting underserved youth to be part of the
It's a
junior
great
rangers.
question you bring up, Lisa. Actually, our new program coordinator, who's been with us for a year, is starting to look into that and is going to be getting back to the board at the end of the year with how we might improve that. It is
Okay.
something we're starting to consider.
That's great. So I had a question.
Can I piggy two other
Okay.
ideas on that? One is, I know we're working a lot on diversity. Hiring a diversity of rangers from different backgrounds, I think, also facilitates the welcoming piece, because you see people of all backgrounds, and that makes it more likely you'll see somebody that looks like you. And then the other notion of, you know, like how the ski areas, like if you're in the 5th grade, everybody goes free to kind of introduce everybody to skiing in Colorado? Everybody knows what I mean? I just kind of wonder if we do that like for 1st, 4th, and 8th graders, to, you know, the assumption is you're going to get out on open space or go do a stewardship project, kind of built into the expectations that if you live here, there will be a time where you will go do something on open space, and the concept of stewardship gets built in. And I don't know if we have that expectation or even that practice, but
3rd grade.
I would,
Is it
yeah,
3rd
no,
grade?
to answer your first question, Jane implemented the citywide equity effort, and we know that's supporting diversity in hiring staff, and we'll hopefully get better at that. Yes, we have, for example, the e-movement, where we collaborate with our partners on how we do environmental education. And one of the gaps we notice is in certain age groups, between 3 and 6, between 12 and 15. So we're trying to recognize those gaps, because then you lose the continuum of someone engaging, understanding the awe of nature, then wanting to stewardship, volunteer, as well as enjoy it. So we recognize we can do better at that, but we have got some foundation work in place.
I just think this is a key opportunity.
Yeah, we
Well,
agree.
and I would suggest you partner with Parks and Rec to do a bunch of that, because they, back to my comment, this is open space and different from Parks and Rec. And I think there's activities that are totally suitable that we could partner with Parks and Rec on. My last comment, or on the CCEI 9, preserve and interpret. What is Boulder's cultural heritage? Is it like since white guys got here, or are we including Native Americans?
Absolutely inclusive of all cultural resources on open space lands. A lot of them are prehistoric, and we do protect those in accordance with the National Heritage Preservation Act and state laws.
Okay, so I think it would be helpful if somehow that handle was written differently, because it doesn't come across that way. It comes across as since the Europeans got here.
Yeah.
And we didn't start it. Maybe we started bad habits, but we didn't.
We talked about that actually at the Native American consultation, the idea of, there were a lot of tribes present, but the idea of having many of the tribes be able to tell their story in various locations, and how ought you do that given the diversity of tribes. And anyhow, it was the beginning of, I think, of a very rich conversation about how we might do that.
And I would just add to that, it's not just open space's responsibility, because there were Native people all over the city of Boulder. And so we have burial grounds really close to here that aren't on open space. And I want to be very cautious of, just because different people inhabited Boulder at one point, we don't go to one department to make them pay for all of it. And so it needs to be distributed amongst the city, the cost for that.
So I don't want to redirect this conversation. I think it's a really good one, and I appreciate the topic. But I do want to note that we had hoped at this time we'd be transitioning into talking about prioritization and the funding piece of this. So I want to respect that there are two that we want to discuss. There was an interest in number 5, enhanced signs and communication. One person wanted to discuss that, and then more than one was interested in number 8. So anything for 5 before we move into the prioritization? Okay. 8, consult and collaborate with federally recognized Native American nations and help support Indigenous people. We're kind of on that topic already, but let's get into that a little bit more, and then I think we've moved through all these and can get into the financial strategies. Yes, Aaron.
So I can start that. I was one of the people that called that out. I mean, I thought this is a critically important strategy, and we've been doing some really good work over the last year with the consultation with the tribes. Just one thing, it felt like the language in the main paragraphs was more about honoring the historical connections, the past connections, and I'd love to see something a little bit more about the current relationship and how making invitations to tribes to be here, to revisit, to spend time here and be with us and things like that, and possibly designating specific lands for them to do that. That's kind of an implementation bit, but I just would like to see some language about the current, how we're working on how it happens today with the people who are alive today.
That's another sidebar.
And I would argue we should say, in concert with other city departments, so that we don't feel like open space has to fund and host and do all this. Okay, let's go.
Yeah. Okay. One more, yes.
One other quick thing, there is a MOU between the 13 Indigenous tribes and the city of Boulder, with the Open Space Department. And I think that that should be recognized as providing some guidance in this particular section, because there is a, quote, history of working with some of the Indigenous peoples over the past probably almost 20 years.
And that's what's being updated through the consultation.
Okay. Great. Well, we're exactly back on time. Nice work, everyone. We're going to move into the funding prioritization for the next 45 minutes. And I'll turn it over to Darren to lead that aspect.
I would just ask, does anybody need to stand up before?
Yes.
Just briefly, right? Just a quick.
Sure.
Don't go too far.
Stay on trail, though.
No, continue to move. We'll come back. We'll be okay. We'll keep them longer if you let them move for a second.
Darren, you can come to all our meetings.
We're going to live longer if we stand and move a little bit, right?
We should have a pile of jackets that we can just grab.
It's freezing, isn't it? It's like
Finally got somewhat warm out. Now they turn the air on.
It's just right here.
And then we're sitting right here.
All right, you are welcome to keep standing. I am just going to I'm going to start talking just to keep us moving. But please keep moving if you need to. So we are with our 5th focus area, and we talked about that this is the focus area where this is the how, and the how we're going to implement the strategies across the others. And so as it relates to financial sustainability in and of itself, we do have a set of strategies, again, around stabilizing funding, budgeting for future uncertainty, as well as some of the operational things that we need to talk about, like understanding the total cost of system management, and some definition around what acquisitions will look like in the future, as well as our workforce development and updating our planning framework. So we will devote some time here in a little bit for you to contemplate these strategies themselves. But what we also want to talk about is how we have developed a set of priorities around our strategies themselves. And so to do that, in accordance with citywide master planning frameworks, we have developed 3 scenarios where we look at our current level of funding as it relates to the expected sales tax expirations, And that does amount to about $9 to $10 million a year where our budget is constricting. We have been planning for that for years. Our second scenario is the restoration of some or all of that sales tax funding to think about what that might look like. And the third scenario is what more typically is called the vision plan, where we look at additional and diversified funding above 2018 levels. So that's sort of the general construct that we have established in our draft master plan. And as it relates to how we align our strategies across the first 4 focus areas to those 3 funding scenarios, the way we did that was to understand from our staff, our community, and our board what strategies we should prioritize. And so that's what is reflected in the draft plan are the priorities of those 3 groups primarily, and tonight is an opportunity to refine any of those. We'll revise those priorities as might come out tonight in the next draft of the plan and continue the conversation with board and council as we ask for final approval. And one of the key messages that we've heard, both from our staff, our community, and from the Board of Trustees, is focus on taking care of what we have. And so what we have up here is just the one data piece from a recent survey for the master plan, where we saw a strong percentage of our respondents supporting the improvement of ecosystem health of our existing lands as it relates to acquisition of new lands for conservation. So this is to say that we're still hearing from our community that acquisition is something that we should be in the business of doing, but relative to conservation of our existing lands, let's place emphasis on that. And so that's helped sort of characterize the general prioritization process that we've gone through and what's resulting. And so where we've ended up is with a set of strategies, 17 out of our 46, that we're calling right now our high priority strategies. And what we mean by that is those are the ones that, especially in the near term, out of the gate, starting implementation after council approves this, those are the ones that we would accelerate or emphasize first. Those are the ones that we would devote our most funding to, the most staff time to. We would also, in the second and third financial scenarios, scale those same efforts up if we got additional funding. The other strategies are still important. They wouldn't be in the draft master plan if they weren't. We have gone through a process with the community and board of narrowing down concepts. And so the concept is that if they're not considered a high priority strategy, we still intend to work towards those, but in a more gradual way. And we only accelerate or emphasize those later if additional funding and capacity becomes available. So that's kind of the general construct that we've worked with in terms of how do we take this broad set of aspirations and strategies for the next decade and winnow those down into what we hope becomes a reasonable, feasible number of things to emphasize first. When we talk to you tonight about any refinements you might have, keep in mind that we did hear some comments from the community that we might consider narrowing it down even further. As we think about our staff work plans, I think that's something that we could understand as well, just to keep things feasible and reasonable. And to give you an understanding of, again, how we might scale the work if additional funding might become available as it relates to some of our high priority strategies, we might look to get more of a good thing. In other words, for example, we might be able to restore more miles of creek. We could further reduce the trail maintenance backlog. We could further expand our soil health initiatives. And we'd look to grow the junior ranger program. All of these things are just examples of some of the programs, projects that would stem from the high priority strategies as we've defined them now. But they're examples to just give an understanding of what it might look like where we scale our work to the available funding, whether that's in our current fiscally constrained scenario or otherwise. So that was a brief presentation just to kind of give you some context, and I'm going to turn it back over to Anna to talk about the actual strategies first as it relates to the financial sustainability focus area, and then we invite your comments on how you might want to adjust or refine the priorities themselves. But I would also open up for any questions you might have before we get into the discussion.
So I appreciate the comments on we should take care of what we own and we should manage that very well, and that should be a high priority. But I would hope that are acquisitions, when there's key acquisitions that come up, that are maybe a small piece of land in the middle of all open space, and you don't want to see that developed, that would be a priority. It affects the other priorities on open space. And then one thing we didn't talk about before we got into this, but it came up through the discussion, was more boots on the ground. And that came up under several headings. And so I want to make sure that's in there somehow with this financial sustainability and increasing funding opportunities.
It's just one comment about the acquisitions is I think what this master plan will allow us to do as we look at acquisitions is not say acquisitions off the table, but prioritize those acquisitions that may help further enhancement and improvement of our management of our system. So instead of growing out, you know, it does as acquisition help to achieve a management goal. I could think of a few in-holdings that that we're able to achieve over the last couple of years that had severe invasive problems, and we were unable to control the invasives on our own lands because we didn't have control of that particular process. So through acquisition, it was almost a management tool rather than a traditional acquisition. So this will allow us to look at our acquisition program in light of managing the system.
And that's excellent. That's great.
Cindy?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
So items 1 and 2. Items 1 and 2 were ones that wanted to be discussed by one person. Stabilizing funding and budget for future uncertainty, where there was a clarification. So anyone want to bring those two up?
I did stabilize funding. I just wanted to note that there's a good chance we might put this on the ballot. And so, anyhow, I didn't know, we're not talking about that tonight, but yet it's the context of this, and I don't know, as you go out, we're deciding that before this comment period. No, we'll decide the ballot after the comment period's over. But I do think it would be useful for people to know that that you guys should tell people we're going to be discussing that matter on July something. 16th, so that to the extent that the public cares about this issue, we should let them know we'll be discussing it then and they should weigh in.
Right, and I didn't answer your questions how I was supposed to. I don't follow instructions well. And so I didn't go through the 1, 2, 3, so you don't have, I just said, but I would have underlined that, and I've written 2 emails, hotlines, about open space tax. And I will also say that there probably would have been at least a 3rd underline, and I think we probably all underlined or did your answers differently, so it's not...
i.e., everybody cares about funding.
Right, and so Sam also wrote in his hotmail to the hotline, whatever it's called, that he supports a tax as well, consideration of a tax, and probably something on the ballpark of a 0.15.
So any refinements to 1 or 2?
Pardon me?
Are there any refinements to stabilize funding or budget for future uncertainty, or those are?
I'm just emphasizing that some of us didn't answer this right, and so how you're whiting them or underlining them or bolding them or blacking them is...
Anyhow, her point was to provide that context.
Yeah, and I just wonder if we might have a little amendment process, because it seems like we're likely to move on something this year, which may or may not get approved by voters, and then it'd be nice to have the master plan reflect that outcome once we get there.
Got it. Cindy?
And I just wanted to say that Lisa mentioned a number, and we haven't had that discussion yet, so that's not necessarily...
No, and I'm
cast in
open. I just
stone.
threw it out like for a bid.
Okay. So all the items in black were ones that we didn't have anyone raise the issue with. I want to know, are those all on target? Numbers 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 on target. If so, you can raise your hand of moving that forward. Next steps.
I have a question.
On target, I'm seeing, did you, okay. For those of you that didn't raise your hand, were there any items in numbers 5 through 10 that you needed some clarification or wanted to discuss? Okay, then I'm going to assume that we're okay with those. The underlined ones were ones that more than one person wanted to discuss. Oh, sorry, did you have?
Yeah, I don't know what evaluate existing real estate assets on OSMP lands means.
Yeah, so throughout 100 years of acquisitions, we acquire lands that sometimes in order to acquire the lands, we acquire buildings. That wasn't the primary motivator for why we wanted to do that acquisition. So through time, we've accumulated some buildings and structures that may or may not have a deeper level of open space charter purposes than others. And what this is saying is that it's time for us to go through a deep evaluation process of especially those residences that we own. Do they serve an open space charter purpose? Do they have potential to serve an open space charter purpose? If they don't, what are some options for us in that regards? So that's the primary action that could help achieve that strategy. There may be other ones down the road over the next 10 years. We may want to look at land management portfolio that Boulder County Open Space has and that we have, and perhaps there's a few lands that make sense to be under a different regime. We have some very northern properties that are surrounded by Boulder County Open Space, vice versa.
Right.
Does management of these make sense in a different context? So doing that type of evaluation.
Can that somehow that handle get a little more clear?
Yes.
When I first read that, I thought, are we selling off our open space?
Yeah, we'll work on the handle.
Okay. So number 3, understanding total costs of system management. There were more than one person that wanted to discuss this one. You changed your minds? Okay.
I think it's just, I underscored the things I think were the key issues. And I
Okay.
don't think we have, or at least the public isn't well aware of all the costs that go into managing. And when we let some of those taxes expire, based on, including advice of open space staff, I think we underestimated what it would cost to manage the system, especially in the face of climate change. So I do think updating the narrative around that and what the true costs are and educating the whole community is going to be key, both for this plan, but also if we're going to consider a tax. So it's important to get that, clarify that sooner rather than later.
And I would just add to that, also, not just climate change, but in the face of this increasing visitation.
Right.
It's so horrendous.
Yeah, yes, agreed. It just seems things like flood recovery kind of threw a curveball and things.
We will be having more frequent floods.
Yeah.
We will be having more frequent fires, and they'll all be more intense.
All right, then, number 4.
I'm sorry. It's the truth. We're going towards extinction.
It's all going to heck.
Number 4, taking care of what we have. Someone wanted to discuss this one or have a clarifying question on this?
I think it's just as Suzanne said. These are.
Yeah, I think this is a variation on 3 and 4 are very related. What does it cost to manage a system in order to take care of what we have?
Okay, great. Darren, you want to move into?
Oh, sure, yes. All right, terrific. So bear with us just one second. So the next effort is to look at prioritizing these particular strategies.
Yes.
And while Darren shuffles the deck, I had a kind of an overriding question about prioritization that I think is important in helping us develop that list, which is, what is the life cycle of a high priority status? When would high priority status sunset? Under what conditions? Is it as simple as in the next revision of the master plan, which happens in X years, then we evaluate if this is still high priority or not high priority? Do we meet certain metrics and then it is satisfied? I feel like that's something I need to understand in order to understand what's a tractable number of priorities.
Can't see.
You guys want one of these over there?
This will be
Just put it there, right? I hope you're going to just move the screen.
You can use this.
Yeah.
I am anyway.
This is a help.
Okay, so is this working? Yes. So Andrea, it's an excellent question. So as we had talked about earlier, when you think about after we have the final plan adopted and we move into implementation planning, we have the ability to align the master plan with the annual budget cycle. And so those conversations are part and parcel of what that looks like each year now going forward. And so we'll work with the board to put detail around what that consultation process initially looks like with the board, but we envision it being an annual conversation, if not more frequently, in terms of here's the progress that we've made each year, here's what we anticipate for the next 2 to 3 years. Are we still on track with these particular priorities, or have we made substantial progress towards those? Have the sands shifted, in which case we might need to revisit those priorities. But right now, the way we're looking at them is we're talking about them in the near term. We're looking at being able to predict our CIP, for example, and our operating dollars over the next 3 to 6 years, and so we want to give it some life in terms of, again, the next few years at least is how we've anticipated the near term. Does that help? Okay.
That was fast.
What's that? Fast. Am I talking too fast? Okay, can you, I'm trying to respect your time.
The high priorities may shift as changing conditions over the 10-year shift. So what we're envisioning for at least probably the next 3 years, what we land on as a high priority probably will remain a high priority for the first 3 years. But through annual visits of our annual work plan, we may shift those throughout the 10 years.
Through data, right?
And through data, of course.
Yep. Okay, so the ask right now, as we talked about earlier, is whether or not you would suggest any refinements to the way these have been prioritized to date. And so to understand what you're looking at from afar, understanding that it may be difficult to see, you also have handouts in front of you that have the same information as up here. So what you're looking at is those that have an asterisk and that are in bold are the ones that have been prioritized to date. So again, that amounts to 17 out of 46 strategies. And so the ask now is, does that look on target? Are there any refinements that you might make or any concerns that you have in relation to that?
Darren did mention at the beginning that there were some comments that 17 seemed like a large number for near-term priorities. So maybe a decision there to, do we want to think about reducing or consider how many we really have here?
So Tom Isaacson at the beginning, when we were on reduce undesignated trails, I get his point for mountain climbers, and you don't really want those designated necessarily, rock climbers. So are we going to distinguish between undesignated and social trails? I mean, social trails, we should, and then how do you define them? But it seems to me the social trails out your back door should definitely be reduced.
And are you asking that, Lisa, because that might affect whether or not you prioritize it?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just don't know, and I don't know how we, if we're going to change the language to the handle, if it needs to be changed, or what specifically we're doing.
Where we just, it's reduce unwanted undesignated trails, right? Right, or inappropriate runs. All we had to do was modify that
For instance, we have a number of undesignated trails through adopted and approved TSAs. And what this would tell us to do is devote more resources in order to carrying out those plan guidance. Make it a priority. Spend more of your time and resources in order to carry out those parts of those past plans.
Oh, that's different than closing trails that you don't want. Okay.
Aaron.
So I get that 17 is a fair amount, but I want to make a pitch for a couple more. And before I do
Might
that,
have to give some up.
I know. Well, before I do that, though, we might consider a couple of tiers. You know, where I mean, are really all 17 like super equally high priority, or do we have a top 10 tier and a second 10 tier? So I'll leave that for you all to mull over. But regardless, I'm going to make a pitch for a couple. So one of them is the RSC 2, encouraging the multimodal access to trailheads. And there's a couple reasons for this. One is that this is one of our responses to climate change, is to allow people to get to trails without using a vehicle that burns fossil fuels. The other is that, and the main reason is that we have some momentum around this one because of the Chautauqua Area Management Plan, which has been extremely successful. And it seems like that's not something that we want to just put to the side and say, well, we're done with that. Let's, now in 10 years, maybe we'll consider something else similar. And then, of course, the parking impacts that people talk about. And Sanitas or Sanitas is a prime one to look at. So I'd love to see us continue the momentum in that area.
Well, not to mention El Dorado Canyon is sort of hanging out there.
Thank you very much. Another key one. Another key one to do that. So should I pause there?
Aaron, I just wanted to say that someone was telling me just recently that the Chautauqua shuttle has not gotten the same ridership, and that people have returned to parking in the neighborhoods and are just expecting to pay the parking fees. So maybe.
Cindy and I spoke about this yesterday. It was me. And the decline is very slight. And the Transportation Department is monitoring it, and we will make adjustments after we learn more data through the rest of the summer. But we were just noting that when it's a new thing, people flock to it, and now they figured out maybe how to do things differently. So we're monitoring it, and it still is hugely successful. So I didn't want my earlier comment in a conversation with Cindy to be read as it's not successful. It's very, very successful.
And we're only 2 weeks into the season, right? I mean,
that's right.
Yeah.
Right, and I just was at my Chautauqua meeting last night, and they were saying that it's still very, very successful, and it's eased things up at Chautauqua for the cottagers and for other people who.
But maybe not the neighborhoods. But but this goes back to revising the fees. I think the word was improve the fees. I don't know how you improve the fees, but maybe revising them. So for parking, for example, if the parking fees in the area need to go up, they need to go up.
So what I have done, Aaron, in the case of you're promoting this, was I've added an asterisk. So what we need to get to tonight, hopefully, is a level of consensus where we can live with what we end up with. So I've put it there. If we end up adding it, great. Again, the ask is that we try and manage the number. So I know that you had some other promotions to offer. Okay.
The other one was the agriculture, number 4, diversify the agricultural operations. And this is another one where we've had some momentum. You know, you had a plan recently, an agricultural plan that designated 9 possible areas for diversified agricultural operations. We've done 2 or 3. Seems like it would be good to continue moving on that. So, I mean, if you can tell me that you're going to keep developing the new ones without it being a high priority strategy, then that's fine. But I don't want to see that momentum lost either.
Okay.
Can we get feedback from staff? Are you going to do it regardless of whether it's
Yeah, we'll continue to implement the Ag Resource Management Plan and the timing that is in there, which is about 1 or 2 a year, regardless of this. But if you want to make that a high priority, we certainly wouldn't object to that either.
So I have one comment, and I don't know if I'm channeling Sam, but I agree with him on this, and it has to do with water. And it is plan for the future of water. And I don't know what's involved in that, if that's in the ag plan or what. But water is certainly in these next few decades going to become even more a scarce resource. And so we need to be ahead of the curve and understand what we're doing.
So did I hear, Lisa, you might promote that? You might also suggest that.
I would promote that over other priorities that we have here.
Okay, so we've heard some promotions. Yep, Mary.
So I would over another one, but I guess for me, one of the things that I don't have a full picture to be able to say, put this in, take this out, because these don't exist by themselves. Mm-hmm. They touch on a whole bunch of other ones. So it seems to me in order to be able to say which one is highest priority, to me the highest priority would be the one that has the most Venn diagrams, the most circles touching it. And so I can't, without seeing that graphically, I can't really say. But I do agree that, and I was going to ask why Plan for the Future of Water wasn't one of the 17. It does touch on with other ones because of the way the use it or lose it Colorado water policy works. So
Can I ask why it's, number one is maintain infrastructure for ag and water, which seems to be a subset of Plan for the Future. Isn't one about not losing it?
So there are some, we said at the beginning, some strategies go further than others. In the case of water, we don't have a true water resources plan. We talk about it a little in ag, we talk about it a little in the grassland plan, we talk about it a little in the forest plan, but we don't have one where we look at it holistically as a system in and of itself. So this one is talking about the planning process and identifying that. This is the more operational aspects around the maintenance needs in relation to the agricultural infrastructure and the ditches.
Which is the one to make sure we don't lose our rights?
They're both.
Yeah.
They're both
Kinda
important for that.
Well, don't.
they
So this
touch
is.
on each other,
Yeah.
don't they?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so it's
Don't they need to go hand in hand, those two?
Yep, so just a reminder, those that aren't prioritized, again, we still intend to make progress towards. It's just a more gradual effort. So what might that look like is that if, for example, this weren't a high priority, that we might not be able to start that planning process in the next 3 years because something around maybe updating the VMP or addressing visitation from a planning perspective is determined to be more of an immediate priority. We would start the inventory process or continue the inventory process to be ready, and then the actual planning process might not start till year 4. That's the kind of implication here.
And one of the reasons I argued against making Plan for the Future Water a high priority is it can be really expensive because you're really talking about having an inventory of all your facilities, understanding the water budget of all your farms, and that's a big time sink. So I think just going into it at a little more measured pace is, I think, sensible right now.
Yeah, and that's really the process that we're in right now is inventorying and understanding a lot of that information, Kurt. And so this planning step is not quite as high a priority until we have that information. So
can somebody refresh my memory how these priorities were planned? Who came up with 17?
Sure. So it was a process of initially asking staff. We made the rhythm where we first engaged with our subject matter experts. Then we took that out to the community at a community workshop, for example, and other venues where we asked for any refinements based on that. Then we took that to the Board of Trustees in April and had a study session around that and did some additional refinements. So it's a reflection of all 3 of those.
Okay, so now you're at council.
Yep.
And so we can put in some of our priorities.
Yeah, that's what they're asking us for.
And I guess I would like to know, I thought Aaron's idea of having tiers is actually a good one. And, 17 is a lot. And there's some I would take off, and maybe we could have a discussion of what we would take off.
I'd love to hear those thoughts if that's something that you want to.
And it's interesting, I was telling you how we went through phases and fads of lumping and splitting, and depending on the month, we were lumpers or splitters.
Yep.
We also had phases of tiering. And we had 3 tiers to these these to the highest, the high, and the other word.
Superlative.
So, we depending on the month,
Nirvana, maybe.
we were tierers too. So if the desire is to come back with a little bit more of a tiering type of system, we could do that because 2 months ago we were doing that.
Can I ask a question? Is it okay, so back there you say near-term priorities, and then you use the word high priority strategies. Is it the same thing? Is it just we're starting with these strategies? So it's really near-term strategies and longer-term strategies? Or is it just the time component?
I think that's an important way to at least initially talk about it. Some of these might take a number of years. So for example, reducing the trail maintenance backlog, we're going to be in that business for a long, long time. So we might on an annual basis say, yep, still a priority, yep, still a priority. Others might, again, we might evolve past them. So it would only really be for the next few years. But to
So
start
it's
out
a
right now.
yes, it's
so
basically
yes.
timing.
Let's talk about it in terms
Because
of
that
time.
might be more helpful then, to
Yep.
put the timing in it.
Karen, what were your thoughts?
It seemed to me as we went through all of these that 2 got an overwhelming chorus of support. And those 2 in my mind are EHR 1 and RRSE 7. And if that's true, I think we all ought to mark that. If it's not true, let's say
They're
so.
kind of overarching priorities.
Okay, I'm seeing head nods.
And am I hearing where you might be heading on this, Karen? If we develop a tier system, let's just have a select few at the very top, and then the high priority strategies and then the other ones. Is that where I'm hearing you're going with that?
Yeah, it just seemed to me that they would be, based on people's reactions so far, that they would be easy to set aside as the big kahunas that everybody thinks are really important.
Okay.
But we are mixing importance and timeliness.
Yeah.
And so I just, be clear which we're talking about, because I agree with you, those 2 are overarching, and the other one seems to have time components. So I guess we're mixing things.
Yep. Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, Karen, I think absolutely we all agree that those are extremely important for sure. I mean, I don't know that I would put those 2 in a category on their own. There are other things I think are really important here. Like, I mean, reducing the trail maintenance backlog, I think, for example, is something that I would want to make sure we're doing immediately and placing a high priority on it. But also some things that, like welcoming diverse backgrounds and abilities. Doesn't have to cost a whole lot, but I think, God, we really need to work really hard on that in our community. So, I wouldn't necessarily just put those 2 on there.
Okay.
One of the disadvantages we have is that I feel like we don't have a cost on each one of these things. And while I appreciate what Kurt said about the cost of having understanding your water, I can't emphasize to you strongly enough, you better start soon. And that it needs to be maybe a 10-year plan, but we need to understand that we're going to go into that cost, and we need to understand what that study entails, because we can't really do a whole lot without water. So it's kind of basic. And so for me, I look at it kind of as an infrastructure and overarching. What are the things we absolutely have to do? And water, for me, rises way up to the top, whereas, and I don't want to say it's not a priority, but connecting youth to nature or welcoming, I mean, that's important, but to me, that's a little icing on the cake, or if we don't get the infrastructure, you can't do the dressing, is the way I look at it. And so I would look at these priorities more as what do we have to do in terms of preserving the infrastructure and protecting what we own, and then do the enhancements after that.
So one of the things that I'm sorry, did I miss no. Tom, were you wanting to say something?
No, I was just going to clarify. I think a lot of this is talking about timing, and we want to clarify most, if not all of those, are things that we're currently doing, and I don't think anyone is proposing that we stop doing the ones that are lower priorities, but rather it's more, especially in a world of financial constraint, what are the relative prioritization of those things? And so when we think about timing, it's not like we're putting something on the back burner for 5 years if it's not bolded.
Yeah. And we had to remove the screen, but the things that are on this back part is what we're saying about high priority strategies. They're ones to accelerate or emphasize first, whereas the other strategies are ones that are more gradual progress or accelerate or emphasize later with additional funding. So that's how we've kind of categorized what is high priority and what's other.
So one of the things that we've also tried to do in working with the board and others, that we want to make sure that there is distribution across the focus areas, because in and of themselves, council said at the very beginning, we ought to be focusing on these things. So as it relates to these 4, for example, let's go through those. What I heard is confirmation that reducing the trail maintenance backlog and increasing visitation. I saw lots of head nods. Those have been previously prioritized. I saw head nods, yes, for supporting those. Are there any others that you would promote as very important or support the prioritization of as in the recreation focus area? And we'll just move through each focus area.
Are you looking for like a tier 1 of how many? Like, what's your scale here?
We're just looking within this focus area right now. Do those feel like the most important ones?
Those 2.
Those 2.
Yeah, but financially, we can't let our fees slack either. So, while I know you're doing this, you haven't done it since 2006, maybe, or, those fees need to be increased.
So again, understanding we'll keep doing the work, it's just a matter of emphasis.
Yep.
Do those feel like the 2, if we had to pick 2? Are those the most important?
Yes.
Okay. What about under community connection, education, and inclusion? So what's prioritized right now is enhance signs and communications, welcome diverse backgrounds and abilities, connect youth to nature, and consult and collaborate with federally recognized Native American nations, and help support Indigenous peoples. So right now that's 4. If we had to pick 2 in this focus area.
I would,
just in terms of the most 2, if we're looking for that most important tier.
for my opinion, would be consult with the federally recognized tribes, and somehow, I would take enhanced signs and communication off, and I would somehow combine the people one.
Does everybody support demoting signs?
I guess I'm a little concerned about that, because I remember our board demoting that and staff being like, ooh, I wish you hadn't done that. And so,
Interject our opinion.
okay, I like to make these things up, I honestly do. But, I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to speak to why that keeps bubbling up as a priority and help us out there.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so we have done a number of micro engagements. Some of those have been, for example, around people experiencing disabilities, the Latino community, youth. We've heard from all of those communities, as well as others, the opportunities to improve the way we can convey simple graphic messages. So we just met, for example, with the Latino members of the Latino community the other day, and they said, we sure hope you can act on that soon, even if it's just simple graphics or Spanish translation. So that's where this is coming from.
But that's like 5 and 6 combined.
It was also in relation to things like wayfinding, et cetera, so people obey the regulations or understand the regulations better, and that improves, obviously, experience and potentially protecting the landscape. So we
And
know
it
this.
creates stewards.
There's a lot of bang for your buck in keeping this as a high priority.
But it is also a way to implement 6. I'm just going to keep saying that, right? If you have signs that speak to some of the people from diverse backgrounds, that.
No, I mean, we
One way to
talked
do that.
about this with the parking, with the towing, and I do think everywhere in the city, it would behoove us to go to international signage.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. But maybe we can roll a top priority of 5 into 6. I mean, I think we're making a strong statement if we don't prioritize number 6, honestly.
So is it that and consultation?
8, yeah.
Those are our top 2?
Well, can I ask, if we don't, I hear what you're saying about the tribes, but that's on a timeline. That's happening. If we prioritize it, is it going to happen any faster?
Didn't we sign some contract?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, we were there, we did it, they're coming back. I mean, I guess, so what does it mean if we prioritize it? Is it going to happen sooner?
Giving more emphasis to it, giving it more
I
more
think
clout in what
it
you
just
do.
makes us feel better.
So let's take that off, since we just did it.
Okay.
Well, I don't know, I mean, you're
All right.
asking about priorities. You can't have everything you want.
Well, it's proceeding apace, that's what I mean, is,
It is, but I have to say, I just have to say, when you say that certain things are high priorities, it's going to send a message to the community. And so even though we may know that, hey, this is operating on its own, like the diversified agriculture, I can let that one go. It's operating on its own timeline. It's fine. But I think the community doesn't necessarily know that. And we certainly got some public outreach of people saying, this is really important. We have to make sure to pay attention to this one. So I'm fine keeping 3 on here. I agree with Andrea that the signs are super important.
No, and I didn't have that perspective, so that's
All right.
helpful.
So in the interest of time, I'm not hearing any demotions from this right now. I think we heard a level of priority enough. So let's move on to the others and see how it continues to shape up. So under EHR, I heard a lot of support for EHR 1. There are a number of others that are prioritized within this focus area. So are there others that you might either elevate here as the most important, or similarly, we can demote if you hear?
Well, so, but to clarify, 5 is updating grassland management plan, right? Why don't we just say that? Because as it's written, it's an approach, and it's like you don't have to prioritize the approach, you just do it. But that's not what that means. Because I was going to say, hey, we don't have to do that because we're already doing it. And then I read what it really means. It's code for updating the plan for the Prairie Dog Working Group. And, right?
So it should say that.
That's exactly,
So maybe some of the handles need to be a little clearer.
Sure, we just captured that. Thank you. Yep.
Because I guess, given that, I would not demote it, but.
You would not promote it or
No.
demote it? Okay.
Because turns out that's what it's code for, but it looks like code.
Well, and also, I don't know if it's just grasslands, but we should be having an approach, a holistic approach for all our ecosystems.
Yes, so this is, you're absolutely right, Dan, that's the core of it. There's also this kind of policy approach to making sure that we manage our ecosystems from that perspective. But that's how we would do
That's more
it.
embedded, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm hearing that is still important.
Are we already prioritizing controlling invasive weeds, or we're just going to fund more of it? I already thought it was a priority. Or do we need to highlight this one?
If it's a high priority for you, we can highlight it is something that we routinely do. It's part of operations. I don't know that what acceleration looks like yet until we figure out implementation. But
Well, if we're trying to, all I'm saying is, you said you wanted to reduce numbers. We're looking at adding. If we already do this, it's already built in. Does it need to be asterisked? That's my question.
If it's a high priority, how it probably would be done. So during our budget process, all staff get together and they throw in, what CIP projects do you want to do this year? And we start with a list of 100. And we whittle those down and we whittle them down and we whittle them down. This is going to provide us guidance that if we're on the fence, if we're deciding between 2 projects of who we're going to scale up one versus the other, this type of guidance will help us make that decision. So if the guidance is that invasive species is a high priority strategy, and we're debating between how much money to give to that versus another CIP project that isn't, we probably would use this guidance to fund that one at a higher
Then you're going to get
level.
more priorities.
But that's fine, but that's how we would use it on an annual basis.
So I have a question. So reduce human disturbance. Okay, it seems to me that under reduce human disturbance, you would have extend on-trail. I think we had this conversation already too. Extend on-trail requirements, reduce undesignated trails, and control invasive species. So why don't we just take those out and leave reduce human disturbance, and you could still
But if you
include-
read under reduce human disturbance, what you read about is light pollution and noise pollution. So it has to do with the
So we could update that handle as well.
underneath it.
It has
Okay.
to do with the built environment, not
Yeah, I agree with
visitation.
you. But
So could you change the handle then to reduce light and noise pollution? If that's
Yes, we can
right, 'cause
absolutely
you're right, I
update
mean,
that
that's what it's
handle.
about.
We can be more clear.
It's also
Yeah.
adjacent land impacts, oil and gas development, those type of things as well.
So it has to do with adjacency to urban
Yes.
development, basically.
Yes, yeah.
And And so then maybe that's a little bit less of a priority than controlling invasive species.
Okay. All right, so this is helpful. So we've heard a potential around controlling invasives and reducing human disturbance perhaps as a little less important than the others.
Well, I think I got shut down on invasive, so I guess it's still important.
No, for me, it's like nipping it in the bud. If you don't nip it in the bud, you've got a O squared C out of control situation.
Okay.
Nip it in the bud, it's pull it as a seedling.
Okay, so I think reduce human disturbance, rename it and
demote.
And
make
demote.
it a less important high priority.
Okay.
Okay, all right, and what about, let's move on to agriculture. What, just as a reminder, what we'll have the opportunity is to further the conversation with the board tomorrow night if council feels that's appropriate, and then you'll see this again in the next iteration of the draft plan. So under agriculture, right now what's been prioritized is the maintaining infrastructure for ag and water, reducing agriculture impacts from prairie dogs, and soil health and resilience.
We're going to reduce conflicts between agriculture and prairie dogs.
So we've got that, improving the handle naming there. Yep.
I would go with 4 and 9 on that one.
You would prioritize 4 and 9. Okay, and Aaron had promoted that one as well, number 4.
Yeah, and I would support that as well. I think we need to start looking at that. And that's part of, one, in maintaining infrastructure for agriculture. Maybe maybe maintain should not be the word, but reconsider or something like that. So that somehow I would like to see 4 included in 1.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, wait.
1 is about making sure we maintain ditches and that kind of infrastructure. And so,
And fences.
okay. Which is different than diversifying.
Right, but I would like to add the diversified then, too.
Okay.
I'm hearing a relative importance of this. This is an ongoing program, ongoing operations. But in terms of emphasis, I'm hearing 4 and 9.
I would agree with elevating diversify.
I mean, it's a next step. We can't keep having methane emitting.
But this is an ongoing thing, the diversifying, the
So is invasive weeds. This is about
agricultural,
funding
the
for-
invasive weeds are really, I think, very important. So, well, of course they're all important, but again,
This is about just increasing, it's about timing and funding.
Yep. And it provides us additional clarity, especially in our fiscally constrained environment. So again, the goal of this is to hopefully we've arrived at a place of being able to live with what we have right now, knowing that when we reproduce this in the next version of the draft plan, it'll be the next opportunity for the board and planning board to look at it. Council will have another opportunity. But let's talk about what we've done so far, just to reiterate. So for recreation, in terms of the 2 that are right now feeling like the most important, we have reducing the trail maintenance backlog and managing increasing visitation. We also had the suggestion to elevate encouraging multimodal access to trailheads. And the others still felt important. We didn't hear any suggestions to demote anything, but we did develop sort of a tiering as it relates to the 2 most important.
Oh, I thought that meant we were demoting 4. Oh, but maybe not. What does it mean to have 2 circled if you're not demoting the others?
It's tiering.
Tiering, just in terms of the most important, most important.
Okay,
How do you like that phrasing?
tired of this exercise. It doesn't mean anything.
And where does 8 land?
Sorry? It's still an important one, so we'll come back with this tiered approach as we talked about. Okay, so it helps us develop some sense of timing and emphasis. So as it relates to CCCI, Community Connection, Education, and Inclusion, we heard the way to combine 5 and 6 as it relates to prioritizing is to look at enhancing science and communications in light of welcoming diverse backgrounds and abilities. That felt important, and wanting to maintain the others as important for right now as well.
Yep.
Okay, so under EHR, talked about number 1 being of primary importance, which reflects our community input to date as well. The others still feel important with the suggestion that human disturbance perhaps is a little less important. Question about controlling invasive species, perhaps that's something that's in the second or third tier, but still important. These are still things that we would make gradual progress towards.
I think that stays second.
Second?
Yeah,
Okay.
it stays, it's in
And
the,
I'll,
Based on what I
yes.
heard people, yeah.
All right.
So it's a high priority, but
It's a
not on
high
the top tier, right?
Okay.
Right.
still nip it in the bud.
Yep. Okay.
Once they get, but again, once it gets hold, it's
We
almost
got it, we got it.
So under
Just stay in
agriculture, the two most primary ones we've identified are diversifying agricultural operations and enhancing soil health and resilience. The others that are still remaining important in that second tier are maintaining infrastructure for ag and water, and reducing conflict between agriculture and prairie dogs, and potentially planning for the future of water.
Okay, I think we made that too muddy. I think we were just elevating diversifying agricultural operations to black. We're not making it the top tier.
The most important?
Yeah,
No.
that's the note I captured too, Darren.
Okay, all
So
right.
it's just, that's whatever it means to be second tier. I
So
do
is
think
enhancing soil health the most resilient? I mean, the most important?
it is for me.
Head nods, can we live with that for now?
I thought we were picking two. So I
If there's an,
yeah.
if there's another one that we can promote to be one of the most important, let's do it.
So number
If not-
one, if we don't maintain the infrastructure for the water, the ditches, et cetera, it won't be delivered where it needs to go.
It stays a second tier, right? It stays
gonna
black, it's a second tier.
It's also has it has an asterisk by it.
Yeah, we're leaving it.
Yeah, okay.
All we did was elevate soil health and resilience as one of those.
Primary important.
Really, really important, as opposed to just really important.
Got it.
Okay.
And,
So-
and diversify agricultural practices.
Yes.
That got elevated.
Yes, it did. All right, so I know this has been a long night. We've worked for 3 hours. Anna's going to help wrap us up, but I just want to reiterate what this means for us tonight. And what Anna's going to help us summarize is what conversation might need to be tomorrow night with the board. So just by way of wrapping up for right now, we've developed at least some ideas that we can live with for now, with an understanding as it relates to priorities that staff needs to turn back through this. Would council like board to continue refining this tier system tomorrow night? Is that something that you would like?
Do you want to do that?
What do you want to do?
What do you want to do?
We've already gone through a
How is
huge
your time
exercise.
best used?
Okay. All right.
I would just figure out a way to say it to the public that's a little more meaningful
Okay.
than long lists with some asterisks.
Yep.
So,
Yep, and that's reflective, yeah, that'd be
Okay.
responsive to what we've heard. Okay, all right. And so as it relates to other potential topics that the board might need to talk about, bear with me just one second, where did it go? So we talked about, I had the note. Goodness. Oh, here we go. So sorry. Looking at EHR 1, when we were talking about potentially separating whether or not we need to clarify how we might clarify what that looks like as in relation to habitat fragmentation. Is that something that the board needs to grapple with tomorrow night?
Do you want to, or do you think you need to?
Fragmentation
that's a
of,
that's a
it
huge
is a
can of
big one,
worms.
but I mean, that's what it's about, right? Is restoring, is protecting what we have. That was the number one thing on the survey for how many years that people care about. So it seems that they have to look at, or someone has to look at, we have to look at.
Well, and I think I agree. I mean, it feels like there's a fairly narrow question of do you keep it as one or do you split it out into protect and restore?
Well, he said,
I thought we
I think
kept it
it's
together.
the substance of the
Yeah,
conservation
yeah,
and
then
protection.
yeah, I mean,
You guys can talk about it and let us know what you did with it.
I think the division, focusing on whatever you said, preserve, protect, conserve, and also restoring, that they're both really important concepts, therefore it could be separated. I think that's legit. We talked a lot about that. I think tackling fragmentation is the substance of it, and I wouldn't go there now. Isn't that's why it's a strategy, is because you're going to have a planning process around what that means, right?
The how. Okay,
Okay.
great. So we're at 9 o'clock, and we were hoping to be wrapped up by now, but I do want to respect that this is our chance to hear from council, so that tomorrow night you can have it. So we want to extend 15 minutes, if that would be all right, to look at any other questions or reflections that you want to bring to this. So if there's anything that you want to move to, and wanted to hear support for moving forward, or any other reflections you've had at the overall. There was a question at the beginning of when do we have our chance to talk about this big picture overall, and we'd like to take 15 minutes to go around and see that. And Mary, if you wouldn't mind, I know you had some thoughts, big picture.
Well, I had the main thought that, one of the thoughts I had that hasn't been shared yet is that the funding is pretty fundamental. And it seems like it should be the first chapter instead of the last one, because the funding kind of sets the stage for everything else. And we had this conversation, the same conversation about how we were going to tee up the transportation master plan next week. This week at CAC, we were talking about all these strategies, and then funding was at the end. And it just seems like where you are with funding kind of sheds the light on how you prioritize. And so I think that funding should move from the last thing that's presented in the master plan to the first thing that's presented.
That's a bold restructuring move, but I'm seeing two heads nodding very hard over on this side.
Can I play
Kurt,
devil? Can I play
of
devil?
agreement. Is there other consensus around that move of restructuring how it's order of things and moving financial sustainability?
So I have devil's advocate. By the
Another
time
one?
you get to the end, you're like, holy moly, we need more money, right? But that's not how you start. It's when you look at all the priorities, it leads to that conclusion. That's how I read it, is you're totally convinced by the end of all the things you want to spend money on. So to me, it builds that way. That's how I read it.
guess that the way it would feel to me, and maybe there's two different people will look at it differently, and the way it would feel to me, it's like, oh my God, we don't have as much money, and we need to be a little more restrained. Instead of adding more stuff, we may want to take away stuff. I mean, it's how people operate. Well, I don't know. Maybe most people don't operate this way on a personal basis, but you know, you only have so much of a budget when you go to the grocery store, and sometimes you don't buy the Belgian chocolate. So
I think what I'm, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Cindy.
Well, I was just going to, I think Zan makes a good case, but the funding could be introduced more toward, the first paragraph in this executive's summary on page 3, I think is a good one in terms of introducing what it is that is trying to be obtained here, what it is we're trying to preserve and protect. But the funding coming up early, you know, this is in jeopardy to be able to accomplish these kinds of things, which includes like these ecosystem services of clean air, clean water, local foods, if we don't have the funding to do something like that. Mix it up a little earlier, but without going into the whole thing of the funding.
well, and the other, I'll just interject this, that the other conversation that we had at CAC on Monday, and that's happening here tonight, where we're looking at this in a silo, not in the big picture of the whole city and all of the things that we have to do. And I think it's an important consideration.
There.
So couldn't we just do it like a study paper? I mean, I remember back in high school, you'd present your thesis, you'd make your points to it, and then you'd reiterate and make your ask for what you were trying to basically prove your thesis. So if we basically made a statement about the monetary needs in the beginning, proved our point, and then at the end reiterated it, at least you'd hit it on both sides, depending on how you think about things. Maybe you'd attack it from both ends.
I think that would be a nice compromise to just frame it up early that the amount of money that we have will limit our options for each of these, and which is why we end with a big discussion about funding or whatever. Just
Okay. Go ahead.
And I was just,
Okay, but I think that's only part of the response, because you've got to put in context then what the estimated costs of priorities are in order to understand what the relationship is between the amount of money that you have and what it's going to cost or what it's going to take to accomplish whatever it is. And so I do think that we still need numbers, budget, dollars estimated associated with the strategies in order to be able to figure out, okay, what's the relationship between, these budget scenarios and the costs of accomplishing whatever it is.
so I was going to propose something similar to Mirabay's, but I would also say that in 2013, before the floods and doo-doo hit the fan, we decided to significantly reduce what was the open space funding. And that wasn't the best of decisions. And so I think somehow there needs to be, I don't know how you do it, but there needs to be an explanation that we talked about it in terms of what we own and what it's going to cost to take care of it in terms of, climate change, visitor, all of that, And so I don't know if you want to say we made a mistake, but we did severely underestimate the needs of this system.
adaptive management. That's what we're doing. I do think, and maybe this is self-serving, but since you all have to go silent, if we put it on the ballot relatively soon thereafter, I would suggest making that the case for what it costs as much as we can in here so that there can be a robust public consideration of that in context before you guys can't talk about it.
I like how the way you all show support to move forward is talking about the money side of it. But if there are other statements of support or consideration and how you're feeling about, can you live with what's in this plan that we discussed tonight? This is a last before we move on to others discussing it tomorrow.
So just one thing I was going to say to the bookending, the financial pieces of it is perhaps as part of the end bookend, to Mirabai's point, is that's where you introduce the maintain, the middle, and then the vision. So tee it up that way. And I keep looking for the determine the cost understanding. Oh, there it is. It's under financial. Understand total cost of system management. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that is not, it's one of the strategies or one of the things moving forward that we have to do. So we're not going to know what that cost is until
you do the work.
You do the work. Mm-hmm. So
I would say, Mary, we're well underway of that, and we're understanding some costs. We did a big presentation last fall on the trail maintenance backlog, in which we've done a yeoman's work, and we now do understand what the total cost of system maintenance and of that program area is. And we're going program by program, and we're assembling all of that. There's still work to be done, but we're making progress.
Dan? How much is it?
Well, if you want to know of getting all of our system into routine maintenance, to get into our trails into a routine maintenance standpoint, I believe we're estimating that to be upwards of $40 million.
So that's a good starter, right? I mean, again, putting numbers on things like this and letting people realize, but this is deferred maintenance, right? And it's also degradation that's happening more rapidly than one can keep up with it now. So it has all of the elements that we've been discussing tonight. And I would just like to thank everyone for their hard work in putting all of this together and bringing it to us in such a completed form. I think it's really, talk about yeoman's work, the Board of Trustees and staff. pretty amazing.
Yeah, I have some too.
Valedictorian. Valedictorian things.
Okay, Aaron?
Yeah, just a couple things that didn't fit under anything else. On page 20, I believe it is, you have the charter purposes, and you summarize them. And I was just thinking it might be nice to include the actual language. You know, the charter purposes are like the constitution of the open space system, and they're really not very long. So it seemed worth, you know, spending another third of a page on putting the actual language in there. And then my other one was just about how planning is going to work going forward. My understanding from some of the talks I've had with you guys is that we're not looking at doing an East Trail Study Area plan, that we're looking at a different approach to this sort of thing. And you're doing these integrated site projects right now, right? And so it looks like you're undertaking a different method of planning, and it seems like that might be worth mentioning here in the master plan, because I think for people who followed along with how everything has worked for the last 15 years or so, they're probably thinking, okay, when's the next stage? So it felt to me like it'd be worth addressing in here how we were looking at attacking those kinds of planning projects in the future.
We definitely could make a really good reference to that. The specifics of it, what we have discussed with the board, is the specifics of the exact changes to that is something that we're going to have consultation with our board starting the fall and more of the winter of this year. But we certainly could allude to what we're thinking up to this point.
Talk about how you're developing it, so
Yes.
it's not fully fleshed out, but you can talk about how you're developing it.
And the start of that is under the Financial Sustainability Strategy 10, where it's called Update the Planning Framework. So the initial conversations around that are captured here, just as a start. Yep.
But you should reference it under the trail, the recreation piece, because that's where
Okay.
people will look for it.
Yep,
Got it.
for sure.
Okay. All right.
I guess my comments were to echo that it's clear that a lot of work has gone into this, and the public process piece. You know, we worked long and hard trying to figure out the 9 steps on the wheel, and we often refer to some earlier open space processes as examples of maybe what not to do, or landmines to avoid, I'll put it that way. And so I guess clearly you have done that, and that is laudable. The other thing, I guess, I would just so thank you. That wasn't clear. But the other thing is I would start where I begin, which is everybody's going to want to know what's next. So when you present this, I would explain to people the things that are already underway for the next 2 years, and then where the implementation discussions. I think because generically saying we're going to decide later what we're going to do next just is not satisfying. And anyhow, and we know more than that. So I guess I would just encourage you to flesh that out a little more, so people don't feel frustrated, but inspired by where this goes next.
And just to respond to that, Kurt had made a good suggestion that the implementation piece was buried a little bit in section 4 under the financial, and Kurt suggested we might pull that out as its own chapter, so it's easier for people to find. Great.
So I would like to just make a comment about the community engagement process. And I just wanted to remind everyone that this was the pilot of the new community engagement process, and it was unbelievably disciplined. It really was, and thorough, and I think a great job. And I hope that we all learned something from this, and it'll be a tough act to follow, I think. So thank you, guys.
And if I can add in also, as a member of the process subcommittee, Mary, thank you for all of your work, as well as Tom and Kurt. And but just how thorough that was. It was very high quality engagement, and it got out to many people in ways that were both quick but also deep, and also the micro engagements with like the members of the Latino community, youth, have hit people that I don't think we've really hit before in other public outreach efforts. And I was very impressed. And so I really do hope that this can be a model for other city outreach efforts.
Well, and we talk about taking these processes, or the lessons learned, and then handing them to other departments. And so I guess, I know we looked to Jane, but I guess Cannon underscored, and we're doing the transportation master plan. There's other plans coming up where we should build upon what was successful.
And I'll just say, I was on that 18-month process of how to do better communication, and I want to thank Jane for supporting that. And there were, I think, 15 people in our group, plus other people who put that together. So I'm very happy to hear that it's worked so well. And it will be a tough act to follow, but at least now we have a map, which I like, of how to do it. So, and I want to just thank everybody for your work on this. It's not been easy. Open space is never easy because everybody has 10 opinions, but I really appreciate it, so.
Okay. I think with that, we're adjourned. That was great coverage of topics. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for your time.